Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to 2 of our Law Society Technology. We have got 3 more panels for you today, covering the intersection between law and technology, and we'll be building on many of the themes that we discussed yesterday. We ended up discussing building business resilience, where we were looking at the response that made embracing technology and being able to and sharing some of the challenges they had faced with regards to the adaptation and use of technology. We looked at the challenges faced from a compliance perspective, looking at the issue as well as some of the more day-to-day compliance challenges that we face as well. And then we also looked at, in quite a lot of detail, some of the challenges faced when it comes to using legacy systems, the more strategic approach to the use of those systems in terms of using higher technology. And I think we shared some real valuable insights, and we're looking to build on that today with the panels that we've got. So coming up, we've got a discussion with Mark Kitely and Gary Gallen, where we'll be looking at agility, smaller firm, technology, and your business. Unfortunately, we're not going to be joined by Rachel Roche, who was going to be joining us for the session this morning. But then follow that with panel 5 from 11:05. It's innovation, build, buy, acquire, or invest. In that, we'll be looking at in depth some of the law tech systems that are now coming on stream. We'll be joined by Ventures and Codebase, who are involved on the largest UK technology incubator, the LawTech Eagle Lab. And finally, with our 6th session of the conference, the final session of the day from 12:10, will be health and well-being, the impact of technology. And around mental resilience, we did brush on in panel to that in more detail, where we'll be looking at some of the challenges when it comes to relying and using technology, some of the issues that is, some of the solutions and ways of being able to handle some of those challenges. Of the announcement from government yesterday with regards to work from home where you can, work from home where possible, then I think that will be an interesting session. Any more ado, we'll now start our 4th panel session, agility, smaller firms, technology, and so I'm now joined by our speakers for the panel for small firms, technology, and your business. Unfortunately, Rachel Roche from Roche Legal, but we are joined by Mark and Gary. So first of all, Mark, would you like to introduce yourself to our...
Morning, Peter. My name is Mark Kitely. I'm a director in Rawlins Davies Solicitors in Bournemouth. We're probably regard ourselves as being a traditional law firm. Hope you're well.
Mark and Gary.
Good morning, Peter and Mark, and good morning, everyone in the audience. My name is Gary Gallen. I'm the founder and CEO of a law firm called Radar. We're headquartered in Hull. We have offices now in Glasgow, Birmingham, and Leeds as well. We are an alternative business structure. I've been in the legal profession for 30 years and circa 6 or 7 years ago resigned from the international law firm I was a part of, and then created technology-enabled legal services business from that point to today.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much. I suppose my first question, just building on your introduction there, Gary, I'm conscious of the fact that we have over 550 people registered for our conference, many of whom are from outside the UK, so from around Europe and around the world. And I suppose, should we just clarify, when you say you're an ABS, what does that actually mean?
Several years ago, deregulation of legal services in the form of the Legal Services Act allowed non-lawyers to take part in the ownership and management and direction of law firms, corporate structures with shareholding, the ability to raise capital from the private equity markets, for example. So I took advantage of that new legislation to create a hybrid model, in effect, as it were, with a teaching focus, a large technology team and component, but without relinquishing the skill set and the expertise of legal knowledge. So we also have the legal license because we do practice law on a daily basis, and the knowledge and the content of the law is as integral and important to the technology component. But yes, we wanted to adopt a modern corporate structure to reflect the modern corporate culture and behaviours that we wanted to instill in the business, and everybody recruited into it.
Brilliant, thank you. And I suppose as well, just to let our audience know, Mark, I mean, Rawlins Davey has a longer established, fantastic reputation on the South Coast. Just want to tell us a little bit about the sort of types of business that the firm undertakes, and how long you've been around for.
Yeah, so Rawlins been trading since the 1830s, which I always think is quite exciting. I try and explain to my children that means we've been around as long as cowboys, and things they can try and relate to, but they still seem to they still seem to think that a lawyer is a lawyer. In terms of clients, we do a lot of commercial work. At the moment, of course, property's going very well. We've got some nice long established clients. It's a good portfolio. But one of the problems you've got when you've got a long-established law firm is that it doesn't change direction quite so easily.
So indeed, looking at that, we've got two very different organisations here. Then I just wanted to ask the question of how has the sort of switch to remote working this year, agile working, how has that affected your respective organisations? And Gary, I know it had a bit of a change for you from how you've been sort of working in the past. So do you want to start off with that?
Sure. Well, it may help to explain that we're a litigation-focused law firm. So we don't do consumer law. We're all corporate. It's a B2B solution. But as a litigator, courtrooms, police stations, inquiries, client premises where evidence is and witnesses are, has been part of the makeup of the legal side of the business. And so where we are today we've recruited well over 100 staff in the last 2 or 3 years. We have probably at any moment of the day pre-pandemic, at least a third of the staff on the road, agile, working in client locations, court locations. What the pandemic did mean was that we could accelerate that flexible working across the rest of the disciplines in the business. And I'm very proud to say that as a new business, we are cloud, we are native, we are an open architecture, so it was very easy. Everybody had a laptop, a phone, headset, etc., for people to be able to quite seamlessly work from home. And we will still continue actually largely a flexible working model going forward. A minimum of 50% of the time for staff is home working in the event. But it has presented some interesting challenges with our ongoing recruitment, where we're now interviewing, onboarding and inducting people next to the ironing board and the kettle in the kitchen and things like that. So we're meeting new staff only virtually. So we're looking forward to be able to start more co-mingling of the staff and socially distanced, partially opening up again, but only probably 30% of the staff at any one time coming into the offices, and that's been our journey for the last 6 months.
Yeah, our experience was perhaps a little different to that. We would have had most of our staff in the office most of the time before March. I've spoken to other firms, and I think our experience then is not too dissimilar to firms of our our size and our background, in that a week before lockdown took place, like many other firms, I think we were sourcing laptops like Billio, and then we all took them home, and after a couple of days we discovered that we didn't need to phone the help desk to work out how to turn them on and off. And after a week, we perhaps discovered that there was quite a clever case management system hiding in there somewhere. And after 2 weeks, we perhaps thought, brilliant, we're never going to need to bring staff off furlough. We can all do this ourselves. But I think that perhaps March, April wasn't a real experience because there was the property lockdown. The number of new instructions was not the same. And we're now looking at seeing whether the systems that we've put in place over the summer are going to be robust enough to keep us through the next few months, which are probably going to be more challenging. Because if Boris keeps the economy running, we've got the virus threat, meaning that we've got to consider how we work, but we've actually got what's far closer to a normal caseload. It's going to be interesting times.
Indeed, and I think it's very much that sort of challenge of how we're able to then work effectively going forward. And I suppose one of the key things to think about there is the fact that where we're then trying to perhaps turn over more work than, like you say, in March, April, where it was more challenging, but larger parts of the economy were shut down. It then comes a matter of, well, how do we sort of hit the right mixture now? So I just wanted to ask in a bit more detail, because I've heard of some partners in some firms where they've said, well, we actually carried on working throughout the lockdown. We were still going in. The words splendid isolation were mentioned more than once, where I think some people actually quite enjoyed being in an office that was empty and being able to just come in and do their own thing. For others, I think it was then more of a challenge to that, how are we going to do everything entirely remotely? And I think an awful lot of firms have now sort of landed on a sort of hybrid model now as a result, where there's sort of a few people in the office, and I presume from the view of the offices from your window there, Mark, that you're in the office as I am today. So I suppose I just wanted to sort of ask, in terms of the fact that now we've got the guidance from yesterday saying, well, work from home where possible, do you see your firm sticking to that sort of hybrid model going forward? Or
yeah, I mean, I certainly recognise the phrase "splendid isolation," and there was certainly one or two partners here that really did enjoy the fact they could be in the office and not disturbed. And I've spoken to colleagues around Bournemouth and Dorset where that phrase certainly resonates. But we've now settled on the hybrid model. It's something that we're quite comfortable with. It means that we are in touch with the vast majority of our workforce over the course of the week. They will come in a couple of days a week. They'll work from home the other days during the week. And supervision works better that way. Human contact works better that way. They can allocate the type of work they feel they want to do in the office. We've got our premises here lean themselves to that to an extent. We have got offices for all the fee earners. That may have been more challenging if we were set up with more of an open plan environment. So that all works okay. I think that given that we've got some junior staff, we took on 2 solicitor apprentices last year, and I think it would be very difficult for them to learn remotely. It's possible, but I do think that watching and learning is better done over the shoulder rather than over the webcam.
I think that's an incredibly important point on supervision. I'm going to come back to you on that, so hold that thought. But I just wanted to let Gary come in on that and just say, do you see your approach and your firm's approach changing in light of the guidance from yesterday, or do you think it's going to be continuing sort of steady as she goes in terms of the way you've been working over recent months anyway?
I think we'll remain in hybrid. I've been around in the legal profession for 30 years. The reason I decided to resign and leave a big international practice, having been a partner and set up a high street practice and a consultant to many businesses, was the fact that it didn't allow a more flexible, agile model within existing law firm working structures. Mark's touched upon the cultural issues in some of his partners, etc. So having made the conscious decision to leave to set up something that was more flexible, hybrid, home working, focused around clients and client services being where the clients need us to be, solving the client's problems, we've architected not only the technology, but the working practices of the business, the recruitment policy, the locations of offices, and our business partners around a hybrid model. So I think that's how we went into this. Of course, we followed the government guidance, but a little bit, as Mark said, we've got a trainee population, and it is difficult. We know, speaking to those trainees month on month, surveys, one-to-ones, team sessions, not being amongst the blended senior and mid-ranking team members that they have. They're missing out on the conversation on case by case, issue by issue, of that freedom of conversation. Trying to book a call now, send an email to ask about something is a little bit difficult. So our trainees are desperate and want to be back in the office, so we'll accommodate that so that it doesn't damage their careers, etc. We've got members of staff that are in city locations, in rented accommodation, without so much as a window box. So actually, it's been difficult in lockdown for them as well. So we have to recognise the mental health issues, the well-being issues, etc. Not everybody has the ability to set up a comfortable home office, freedom of back gardens and open spaces and things like that as well. So some of our staff in city locations have had it a little tougher. We're trying to accommodate that. And then some of the more senior, long-serving members of staff with their children in jobs and flown the coop as well. It's been interesting listening to some of them that still very much love their partners, but very much want some social interaction, communication, be back in the workplace a little as well. So we're making sure that we're listening and talking to all of the different members of staff all the way through the journey to make sure that our hybrid model does accommodate everybody's needs.
I think that's absolutely right. It's that matter of consulting and making sure that everyone's got the arrangement that works for them, particularly those that might be caring for, I mean, it's certainly a challenge for those when, of course, the schools were closed and needing to look after children, but then others who might be sort of dealing with, having to care for those who are vulnerable, or in a scenario now, actually having to be in a position where they can drop the kids off and collect them from school as well. So it's a matter of sort of being able to fit in all of that, and at least I think that the technology, and in fact, I think we've ended up embracing remote working a lot more this year, means that we're then able to adapt to those requirements a lot more flexibly. Now, thank you, Gary, for sort of going into some of the issues there on supervision. And Mark, you mentioned the fact that you've got apprentice solicitors. So let's just actually unpack that for a second, because my firm, we have apprentice solicitors as well, and they are trained through BPP University. So that means that they have 1 day a week law school. And certainly through BPP, they end up doing all that remotely. So all my apprentices, 1 day a week anyway, they'd be doing webinars and podcasts and interactive learning through Adobe on these sort of interactive sessions, where it's basically a virtual lecture. They were doing that anyway for the last couple of years. So the only challenge they faced with lockdown was then the fact that the assessments then had to be delivered online. And I got the impression that was a much more stressful exercise for the lecturing and academic staff to put together than it was for the students. They were very much like, well, we do everything else online. You know, well, the students were like quite embracing of doing the assessments, whereas I think the lecturers working at speed to put that together was a challenge. Now, I mention this in terms of the fact that certainly many of the law schools were teaching their apprentice solicitors in quite an innovative way anyway. For those who don't know, the apprenticeship model means, in effect, and I presume this is the same for you, Mark, but in effect, you've got apprentices who start when they've finished their A-levels. Certainly with us, they're with us for 6 years. During that time, they get the degree level qualification. They then get their work-based learning with us. They then end up sitting SQE 1 and 2 when that's through the services board, and then they'll qualify as solicitors at the end of that process. So it's a much cheaper certification as far as it's funded the apprenticeship. So it's meaning opening up access to the profession, just halfway in, cheaper than the traditional routes. So people who are entering the profession, who are coming in, who are potentially first people in their families to be going to going into the profession. And I think because we're getting more diversity and thought into our firms and eventually into our management. So that's the approach that my firm has followed, and certainly the apprentices have coped fine with things we've asked of them this year. When it comes to supervision, we felt that having that hybrid model of being able to come in and have conversations with potential, because there's only so much you can do on a video call. There's only so much you can do on instant messenger. So I suppose coming to you, in terms of how your apprentices are trained, is that through a model?
Yeah, so it's very similar. We use the University of Law rather than BPP, but as you say, they spend one day devoted to academic studies. Over the course of 6 years, we take them from post A levels, and over 6 years, they become qualified solicitors. We thought it was a fantastic idea. We really did, and it turns out that quite a lot of the parents are finding it quite an exciting idea as well. When we're doing the careers fairs, and careers fairs would always be the case that you'd have the sort of pupil walking along with the parent, and the parent would be guiding the pupil to where they thought they needed to be. And now much the same, only the parent is asking at each stand, do you do apprentices? Because obviously, in terms of the cost, the idea of leaving without that level of debt is an enormous advantage. But I have to concede that when lockdown took place, one of the first steps, one of the first groups that we furloughed were the apprentices, because we thought it's going to be very difficult for us to supervise and to train in that sort of environment. We then brought them back over the course of the summer, and I think again their worth has really been proven. So I think I said earlier that property at the moment is absolutely phenomenally busy, and apprentices have got a great role there. There's lots of things that they can be doing in terms of file opening and those sort of quasi-fee earning roles, and really helping out and earning their keep. How we continue to do that, if we do need to start working from home or increasingly working from home again, we'll have to see. I suspect many of us think that that the changes introduced by Boris yesterday are only going to be made more restrictive. And I don't know what he will do about the economy and what he's going to do about keeping people working, but really starting to lay it down thick about working from home.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important point, because it comes down to what works effectively. I mean, it's interesting actually that the universities confirmed very early on as well that if an apprentice is furloughed, they can still sit their assessments and they can still study. And that's not their progress to their qualification is not impacted by them being furloughed, which I think was a very important and very welcome clarification from the government quite early in the lockdown. So at least their education wasn't being impacted in the way that, of course, undergraduates and postgraduates have been impacted when their universities just have to close full stop. But I think it's interesting when it comes to then. It's fine, okay, we're in lockdown for a few months, but then it's now, 6 months. We've had to embrace technology when it comes to continuing their training, and also things like recruitment. And Gary, you talked about this in terms of trying to do recruitment and doing interviews when you can see people's kitchens behind them and different things going on. I just wanted to ask how you've both sort of approached the recruitment process, both Mark for your apprentices and also Gary for your staff as a whole. When it's come to you.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah.
Do you want to go, Gary?
If you want to finish the apprentice point, then I'll talk about the wider. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. In terms of we didn't look to recruit new apprentices over lockdown, but just one of those. Just another point to add. Trainee solicitors. We had a trainee solicitor that was due to qualify in August, and of course we were troubled that if he were to be furloughed, that's going to have quite a significant impact on his career and his life. So we actually made the decision that we wouldn't furlough him, irrespective of whether he was really going to be typical levels of busy, just because that didn't seem to be the fair thing to do. And I imagine that there will have been unseen impacts for trainee solicitors that will perhaps become more apparent over the next 12 months, whether we see whether training contracts extended. I'd be interested to know, out of the people that were furloughed and when the redundancies start to happen, how many of the trainees are the ones that are let go.
I think you're right there, Mark, and I really hope that it's not the case that it's the trainees that end up bearing the brunt of this. I think that would be incredibly unfair, but I think it's going to be very difficult decisions for a lot of firms. Gary?
Yeah, well, we're a multidisciplinary model. So we have solicitors and we have barristers, judges, former judges, former police officers, prosecutors, health and safety experts, accountants, etc. But we also have a very significant in-house technology team. So we code and develop our own solutions as well. So we have those, and we have teachers, educators, and advisors. So our recruitment is not the traditional lawyer only and straight into that legal route. We've got a range of discipline services that we need to recruit to. And by good fortune, we had been looking for our first people director to come in to work with a brilliant in-house function that we had, and we recruited Sarah Blanchfield as our people director at the turn of the year. The plan that she had to come in for the business clearly got shelved because of what happened in March, so she was barely on with the plan that she came in to deliver, but she's quickly adapted, and I'm pleased to say that we've been able to recruit her. To Mark's point, I suppose at the end there, a passing comment, we have recruited and just welcomed into the business, albeit virtually at the moment, some brand new qualified solicitors that have been trained elsewhere. But I suppose to Mark's point, we're the beneficiaries now because we're recruiting and expanding. So we've been able to offer them the newly qualified positions to come in and join the teams. And we look for youth, we look for mid-range experience, we look for the senior to get that blended solution that clients need. But yes, I'm touch wood, we've been successful in many respects. Our model prior to the pandemic was very much a change model that we had to go around and promote and explain our new style of delivery and service, etc., to customers to grow. In many respects now, we're finding that the customers are very empowered, very much more knowledgeable and in control now of what kind of services they require. And so it's meaning that we are picking up in business, we're picking up in contracts, and we're winning a lot because actually that technology-enabled solution that we deliver is something that the customer is seeking out to change to. So I think that's also something that helps in the recruitment market. I think the young lawyers that are coming through in particular are looking around and being quite astute and looking at, well, what's the model that's going to work here? Where are the opportunities?
I think that's a really good point. And I mean, when it comes to the recruitment as well, Gary, is that something that is that been done entirely using technology online as opposed to doing anything face to face, or has it been a bit of a blended model where you've had some face to face?
I think because of the initial rules, it all had to be face to face. I think now we opened up our offices just over a week ago. On a small percentage basis, and volunteers being in the office and accommodating those categories of staff that I mentioned earlier that have particular needs that need to be satisfied. So I'm sure that we will look at starting to introduce some still measured socially distanced meeting, but to this point it's largely had to be, because of the regulations, a digital journey for recruitment to this point.
Yeah.
Do you think, Gary, you're spending less time with the new recruits because you're doing it virtually than you otherwise would have done? Or was your model fairly well adjusted to that anyway? So you would only be spending the same amount of time if COVID hadn't happened? I'm just thinking how we make sure that we've got the right, if we've got less people in the office at any one time, how do we make sure that we preserve the sense of culture? And that's especially true, I think, when we're looking to recruit new members of staff.
It's a good point, Mark, and I suppose as the founder CEO, as people, the initial recruits worked out of my home, it's easy to keep a particular ethos, culture, etc. You can see it, you're all together, it's very family. Then we got into the first premises, but you're still together. You can see each other, you can hear each other, you know what's going on. Culture's easy to get your arms around. Over time, my role as the CEO and what I can do and what I can focus on, I have to accept changes. But I do like people, I do like conversation. I sit open plan in the offices with the teams, talk to them, work with them, so that when I'm in, I'm very visible and accessible. So I do miss that personally as the CEO. But one of the things that I've had to accept is skills of other people are better than mine. in people management, operational roles, the well-being, mental health, HR function teams, etc. So Victoria Botridge, Heather Brown, Sarah Blanchfield, and others that are part of the team in the office are brilliant about keeping the culture in place and still communicating and working across the business and up and down the team structures as well. And as you go from one office to a second office to a third office to a fourth office, and you've got 40 staff, 100 staff, 120 staff, approaching 150 staff, that culture, your job and responsibility is to empower others with it and make sure that other people are doing that job of communication, support, access, etc. For people in the business. So I had to build an operational layer. I've been expanding the boardroom with more talent in the boardroom and starting, in effect, to take roles away from myself so that I can focus more on the strategy, the vision, the growth, the access to capital, etc., and resources that we need, and allow other people to take on the right responsibilities and bring their specialisms to bear in the business. It's quite a journey, that. But it's an extremely rewarding one when you start to see potential being released in others, because you're empowering others, they're empowering others, and that's what's helping us grow so quickly. You can't do it all by yourself. If you try and ring-fence everything and it's about you and your status and your ego, you just can't grow and you can't expand as we have done.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, and of course you've actually experienced quite rapid growth over the years, Gary, as well. I think that's a great testament to the fact that you're doing things in such a different and innovative way. And I just wanted to sort of ask on that: do you think that, given the way that you're now delivering services as a multidisciplinary practice, as an ABS, do you think that clients are more willing to accept innovation and technology as a whole in the way that their legal services are delivered to them?
I do, and I think the pandemic is accelerating change, analysis of business models, efficiency, performance, things that corporate clients themselves may have put off about learning and management systems inside their business, corporate governance, compliance, training, controls, etc., legal services and other professional services. The business had solutions in place working to different levels. The pandemic is making people looking at outsourcing, smarter access, socially distanced, which technology helps to bring as well, enhanced communication, app-based solutions for mobile access and to deploy around the employee landscape of a business as well, not just a traditional lawyer connection to a director or a couple of senior people in the organisation and limited connectivity between the law firm and the instruction giver within a corporate. One of the things that we recognise, particularly in litigation, the problem rarely comes from the chairman falling over the chair in the boardroom. It's usually the activities of the employees in the business at the coalface delivering your corporate client services where issues arise, and what the company thinks its policy, its process and its training process is at the top, and how that is diluted and filtered as it goes down the ranks of employees. So we recognise that our legal knowledge is absolutely key, and what lawyers, I think, need to recognise is that intellectual property that sits in the lawyer's head is the key to success for the future. If you embrace technology in simple ways and wrap the technology around the delivery of the insight, the data, that smart knowledge that legal professionals have, we won't remove the lawyer from the equation, but you will enable the lawyer to be far more effective in communicating with the client. And if you recognise the client's problem is understanding their risk dashboard, what they've got to govern, and then you provide technology and elements of your knowledge that help them deploy good governance, good training, good insight, how to be compliant, how to avoid risk, how to manage issues better in the business, to remove court cases and claims. If you look at the client's problem well enough, recognise the layers of knowledge that you have in your head, and start to look at an architecture of simple technology, simply to communicate with a client and embed it, but you recognise the client's problem themselves is they don't understand the technology. So if you give them knowledge and the enablement of the technology to deploy it, you've got a great solution. Now, previously, you're right, we had to go and explain that and talk to a client and say, from our insight as litigation specialists, we've mapped and looked at all of these frequency and severity issues, and these are the things that just keep on going wrong. Is that right? And if we gave you this knowledge in this modular format with a dashboard for you to be able to see it, but also the means now to deploy it through your business for a more informed, more confident workforce, is that something that you would embrace? And explaining change and driving change is always the hardest thing, but we've now found out that kind of approach and methodology is something that clients are willing to embrace a conversation out online with us about it. They're looking for that kind of solution. They want to embrace, and they know that the old model of niche consultancy and face-to-face is not the way forward. So yes, we're finding that our growth is now starting to move through the gears again. As we were growing pre the pandemic at a very fast rate, we're in double-digit growth again now. And that's what I mean about the insight of the client is stronger, smarter, more driven now. It's demanding change from the legal profession.
Yeah, I mean, that's your question, I think, Peter, was, are clients now more willing to accept innovation and technology? I think the point is that clients are requiring it. Clients want their work to be done in the same way that they do business themselves. And if they are comfortable using technology, they will be very disappointed if their solicitor is not. And I suspect they will make a choice to move to a different solicitor. I mean, there are different types of clients. I mean, anyone that's tried to set up a Zoom with my NAM will know that there are still quite a few people out there that are not as comfortable with video conferencing as others. And there will some people that we speak to over the telephone, and we say we're trying to restrict visitors to the office unless it's absolutely necessary. But we are having some clients that are saying it really is absolutely necessary. I don't want to be talking to you about the personal details that are going to come up in this conversation about perhaps a family or matrimonial issue, while I'm worrying about whether I'm going to lose connection. I want to actually be sat with you in a room if that is possible. And we can offer a COVID secure environment. We do it only as a limited set of circumstances possible. But I think there are still those clients out there, and we'll make sure that we can service those as well.
I think that's a really important point, Mark, and I think actually let's actually open that up a little bit and talk about where you've got that going back to that sort of hybrid working. What do you think firms should have in their COVID policies when it comes to that hybrid of working from home, using technology, or if need be, then having to work in the office? What sort of things do you think firms really should be including in them?
When you're talking about COVID policy, my first thought then was actually not about anything to do with tech, but in your relationship with your staff, perhaps just making sure there's a little bit of kindness in there, and making sure that you are, whilst you're absolutely making sure that people have got hand sanitizer and that floors are being labelled and that there's yellow and black tape everywhere. Absolutely. Let's not forget the human side of things, and that some of our staff will be apprehensive. And we've almost got two cultures now, haven't we, where we've got some people that have been working quite often through the lockdown. They're quite used to popping into town for a coffee, and they're quite used to going around a supermarket of a lunchtime. And then you've got people that have been working from home an awful lot, and they may not have been out even socially as much because they've not been going out 5 days a week or a number of days a week. They're finding the whole outside world a little bit more intimidating than perhaps those that have been spending more time in the office. And they're the ones that we really need to be making sure that we're looking after, and we need to make sure that they've got input in the policies that we're drafting. So the first thing that we've got in our sort of back to work policies are, want you to read this, but it's not set in stone. We want your ideas. You work here too. You're going to see things that we're not, that we haven't seen, that we're not aware of. What will make you comfortable to be in the workplace a couple of days a week? And let's take it a little bit further and say, what would make you comfortable knowing that there are going to be clients coming in to the workplace? And it might be something as simple as, can you have a word with person X, who I don't think is following degrees of caution as I would. If you've got certain clients that are coming into the office perhaps more regularly than they need to, perhaps somebody needs to have a word. If you've got members of staff that are not making sure that those client areas are wiped down properly afterwards, again, maybe we need to have a word. But it's about talking and listening to the entire team rather than sort of prescribing from a policy exactly what they should be doing.
I think that's all really important points, Mark, because it's a matter of them making sure that that right environment is being provided, and indeed consulting and work, making sure that staff are feeling involved and they're in a safe environment. And I suppose as well it comes down to there's a key element here when it comes to productivity to a certain extent as well, to make sure that then when people are working, they're working in the right way and they're supported in the right way, whether they be in the office or at home. And that they're doing the right things, and they've probably got access to the right technology to help them to do the right things. So I suppose flipping that over, Gary, what's your perspective in terms of the main things that firms should have in their policies at this time?
Well, Mike's raised a good few points there, but the word that I did like that I would pick out that he mentioned is kindness. So we do have to be kind to our workforce. I believe in freedom of choice for clients, which is where we're trying to help show them what they can do rather than frighten them with the law about the penalties of what they can't do. So talk to us and we'll give you lots of advice for expensive money. We're more about outcomes. And so we look at the client and the outcomes that we're trying to drive for the client. So that's what I measure. There are people, of course, in the business that look at system and look at process, etc., that measure that to make sure that we drive to the outcomes. But is the business through the lockdown achieving what the clients expect? Are we winning the clients? Are we driving the solutions that we want? Are we allowing them to survive, be efficient, perform better, get access to the insurance to support their businesses and things that they need to do? And resoundingly yes. So behind that, we're not run by the hourly rate. We have a very different model. We're collaborative with other providers and work very much with insurers, brokers, IFAs, affinity groups, membership bodies, for example, in a collaborative approach. But it's all about trust. And so I think with the employees, if there's anything, you've got to be flexible, and you can only get trust by constant communication. So the team is myself as well. I speak to the staff randomly, frighten them and ring them up and have a chat and just find out how people are, get a temperature check around the business, etc. Communicating with the staff. So there's a transparency that is there. They know what direction the firm is going and why, what we're trying to achieve. And I'm incredibly grateful for the team that support the business in doing that centrally, in coordinating all of that consultation and communication. We found a lot out about the staff and their extended care needs with disabled family members, children, shielded relatives, etc., and how we need to adapt to make sure that we allow them to work the hours that allow them to look after their family, feel safe and confident, and still be part of a team that's delivering to a client outcome. So if there's anything in the policy, I think you've got to have a constant communication loop that's going on, and your employees have got to trust that you've got their best interest and the client's best interest at heart, and you're making the decisions that way. And if they can see it, feel it, touch it, and still hear it, even though it's virtually, they're part of that. They can understand the decisions and they can see the bits that they fed into themselves.
Peter, we haven't got the benefit of Rachel being here as well for another view. What do you think should be in the policies?
I think that's a very important point, isn't it? As
I pick up my pencil and start to make some notes.
I think, look, the key thing here, I think, is we've talked about the element of kindness, and I think it's really important to make sure that whatever models you end up following are something that staff can buy into and can follow. So I think it's got to be clear, it's got to be responsive to the needs of staff and responsive to the needs of clients. So it's a matter of sometimes not necessarily sort of saying this is what we're going to do. It's actually a matter of actually working out, well, actually, how do the clients wish to receive their service? How do staff wish to work? And then building something around those inputs and that data, really, which I appreciate is going to be more of a challenge for different organisations to spending, depending on what their infrastructure is, what their model was prior to lockdown hitting, and what technology they have available to them. I mean, just to give you an example, my firm, we went into the equivalent of lockdown earlier in the year, a week before the rest of the country, because it was just literally, right, we know that we could see what was coming very clearly. Funnily enough, I had a few staff who were ill, who'd spent some time in London, and I think had probably already caught it by that point, which may include me. I'm not sure if I had it or not. I've still not been able to get an antibody test or a test at the time, so I don't know. Who knows? But the fact is that it's then a matter of, we thought, well, let's make sure everyone's safe. Let's just now go back to introduce distributed working. We had the cloud already. We had a really secure system. We had apps on the phones. Everyone had laptops, tablets, phones. So it meant that we could do that very, very quickly. And there was no change for our clients. They were still receiving the services that they needed. No change in terms of contact numbers or phones or administration. So that meant that we could do that pretty quickly and pretty responsively. The only change being that then in June, end of June, we went for a more hybrid model because of the supervision. And it was a suspicion that we had. We did the best that we could via video conferencing, via the technology during lockdown. It was once we started coming back into the office, we realised what we were missing. Those conversations that you have that people feel able to volunteer and ask questions in a way that they simply cannot when it's at home in front of a video screen.
Yeah.
Very much if you're on it's like, right, we've got this call at 10 o'clock. This is the agenda. This is what we're getting through. Bung, bung, bung. Anything else? Right, good, great. Thank you very much. Let's crack on. Whereas if you're then in the office and it's a conversation over a coffee, albeit socially distanced, people will then just start to ask about this, ask about that. It's having conversations. It's not necessarily that formal supervision. It's the informal sharing of ideas.
Yeah.
That I think you do have to have that element of being in person for. And I'm actually worried about, not just in law firms, I think in a lot of organisations, the value of that communication and interaction in the office has to a certain extent, I think, been forgotten. I think for a lot of those who are in more senior positions, who've got very nice properties where they're safe and secure at home with a big garden and a room they can use as an office, they're very much thinking, well, why would I want to go back to commuting an hour and a half each way into the office? And yeah, I get that, but the knowledge transfer from you to your junior staff is actually the lifeblood and the continued succession planning for your business. And that has to be done, certain elements, face to face.
Yeah.
And even with the, when it comes to that question of working from home, where possible, we've taken the decision as a firm, having consulted with our staff, most people, I happen to get the train. So I'm 2 or 3 masks now, just to make sure I'm entirely safe. Because of course, you sat on the train, there's people who aren't wearing a mask, not over their nose. Like, please get it right. I'm wearing masks, but a lot of my staff are in cars, so at least I know that they're safe coming into the office. The factors you decide your coach is going to be.
I mean, it's weird. It's losing the nuance, isn't it? That's the problem. That's what you can use over video. And if you're the chairman of a meeting and you want to get a difficult finance report through, you've got a better chance of rattling through without any interruption. But if you're looking to make some fairly significant some fairly significant decisions about staff numbers, they're the sort of things where you really want to be sitting around, if you possibly can, with your colleagues and see the and see them face to face and eye to eye. But it's interesting, isn't it? It feels in a sense that March and April was just the world's worst business continuity plan tester, where we got to see whether our policies would work or not. But it probably, as we've gone through and we've checked out to see whether this has worked and whether that has worked, it has hopefully set us up now to be able to go into the autumn a little better prepared. I I don't know about anybody else's risk assessment, obviously our risk registers, COVID had not previously been on the risk register, and where you're putting down the sort of thing, the likelihood and the impact. Well, the impact's high. Likelihood, well, I'll tell you what, a lot more likely than I thought 12 months ago. That's for sure.
I think you're absolutely right, Mark, and that risk register now has to reflect things like pandemic. Indeed, probably we have to go several levels higher. So do we now have to cope for the zombie apocalypse? Is that in there as well? Along with everything else. But it's almost like this has been a bit of a wake-up call. The government says that a pandemic was always on its risk register, but they didn't plan for a pandemic like this. They were always expecting flu. So it's almost a matter of I think everyone's definition of what's the worst that can happen is now very, very different from what it was in January.
Yeah.
So it's just reflecting that. We've seen the sort of pressures that are, we may have thought, would there be a collapse in instructions from certain clients? You'd think, well, no, that would never happen. And now you're thinking, well, actually, yeah, we could lose a whole sector. And actually trying to build that resilience into the organisation when you're then making your future strategic investments and decisions.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line, I guess, is that for firms such as mine, and there are a few of us, it will have made us up our game from an IT point of view. It will have been an exercise in which everybody has become far more familiar with, the case management system and a little less reliant on support staff for accessing it. So in that sense, it probably has been a real positive, and I hope that momentum carries on. The question, I guess, then is when you mention investment, if we felt that the business continuity plan test, our response to that was adequate and it was okay, do we now choose to invest more money in IT at the moment, given what Boris announced yesterday? There are areas that I rushing to invest a lot of money in a new IT toy at the moment. My children can't eat cloud computing, and although there are things I think we can do better, and I know we can do better, I think we'll probably look back and think, yeah, it's great that we've moved from there to there, but actually moving on that next level, maybe wait until the spring. Stockpile cash.
I think that's probably an understandable urge to a certain extent, because at this time we're sort of looking and thinking, yeah, let's make sure we can at least afford to pay the bills. But I'm imagining, Gary, is that an approach that you'd agree with, or would you actually, given, for example, the way that your firm is growing, would you sort of be more looking to say, well, let's use the technology to assist the growth, and actually this is the time to invest and push forward with that, as opposed to sort of battening down the hatches, hoarding the cash and hoping that we can get through it? What would be your approach?
Well, I suppose I understand exactly Mark's view and why he says what he does, and of course we all need to make sure that we're in place. I suppose I set out this business, which means fast growth is in our DNA. Agile is the way that we built the firm from the ground up. And being part of the legal profession, you can look at of the failure to invest. You can look at the fact that firms have case management systems, practice management systems, CRM systems, time recording systems. Then they might have got a client of some kind, but none of them connect, none of them talk to each other. Very rarely is it integrated data model. The architecture has got no plan to combine and to bring these together into a seamless solution. So recognizing that the legal services allow agile and dynamic to provide clients with better access to smarter, faster, intelligent, accessible, affordable solutions, I set out to be that and take advantage, nimble, brand new business built to a new standard. It was interesting though, and I know I mentioned this, that all working together meant that we were a very different proposition for a law firm And so nobody would invest in the model. It was actually far too ambitious, could not be achieved. We remained an equity partner of an international law firm, getting paid lots of six-figure sums of money. But I was ruthlessly focused on the client's problem, and 25 years of practice by that point had taught me that this is what the clients are. This is what they're insured partners, and they've got a vested interest actually in trying to enhance performance and educate. They don't want claims as much as businesses don't want to be rooms, etc. So there is a new bridge. There is a new space to occupy, building a shortened relationship between clients by this knowledge transfer and digitalizing it and being smart. So proving that model was very interesting and growing very, very quick with that kind of model. So it was all about investment. So remortgaging, selling the car, cashing in the pension, all of those things all in to prove it. But it's funny, when you prove that that model works and you are disrupting and you are changing and you're winning a lot of business, we had to scale very quickly then in a short space of time, because we won some very large contracts from some very large financial services businesses, which were giving us groups of 5 and 10, on one occasion 1,000 corporate customers to start servicing. To be able to do that, you have to have technology. You cannot scale without effective technology solutions. You cannot just be recruiting hundreds and thousands of humans to be able to service that at pace. So I did borrow some money twice in London from the private equity markets. It is incredibly difficult to me in the region, particularly for legal services businesses. So it was London where I borrowed the cash from, but I was very focused on this client service agile platform, Peter. And so I'm proud to say that the recruits and the team and the scale of the recruitment meant that we were able to hit certain EBIT and profit growth measures and hit 5 million turnover, 10 million turnover. So using my lawyer's skill, when I'd got that equity investment, yes, we gave away ownership of the firm, the majority shares, but we'd built in some markers to allow us shares back. So we just did that at the turn of the year. So actually the business owns its own shares again now. We don't have external capital. We've got our own profitable growth. But I suppose the reason I give you that context, that means we were attacking legal force in the marketplace off the back of the financial crisis. Again, when everybody says you can never make it work in the back of a financial crisis, well, actually opportunity is there if you still look at it. And whilst other people are looking in and making certain decisions of a short term, we see the opportunity to continue to grow actually. And although we're using natural language processing, AI, talking digital assistants and providers, we are actually looking at our digital core and looking at the next technology, and the next technology are investing a significant money, a 7-figure sum. We're looking at moving that to the next generation. We have opportunity to grow, and that's what clients want the solution. And we've got a lot of business partners now seeking to ask us for access. So we're not going to say no to the opportunity. So there is opportunity out there, but you do have to be brave and you do have to be willing to take the risks, which I appreciate is very difficult. Mark to a crystal ball for looking forward, but you never win any opportunity without taking a risk. And so no, we are looking at investment and growth on that basis.
Suppose just in our last 5 minutes, Gary, I mean, are you able to sort of give any insight to talking about technology should really be investing in? And I asked that question because I know for other firms it can be quite overall, you know, how do we start this? There's so many different providers out there. You go to different conferences, and I'm sure if this conference was taking place in person, we'd have a lot of exhibits. And I think that would be, to a certain extent, I mean, it's great, but sometimes I think to be overwhelming to think, where do I even start? So what would be your advice? What would you sort of be looking to invest in when it comes to this challenge?
Okay, in the short insights in relation to that one then, and a lot of them born from getting things wrong and having to iterate really, really quickly. But first and foremost, so you must understand your client and be absolutely clear on what kind of clients have you got? What kind of clients do you want to retain? What kind of clients do you want to grow with and are going to be available to you on the other side of the pandemic and coming out the back end of the year and into next year? So I suppose I made sure that the business wasn't going to try to be all things to all people. So governance, we looked at compliance and litigation skill sets for corporate only, and dispensed with everything else. So I think the key to it is being very, very clear on what you're trying for who. Be sure that you know what their problem is, and then start to look at what knowledge needs to get to that client to solve their problems in a smarter, faster, more efficient, better way. And then start, and you're touring what types of technology take that in that I have as a legal professional and get it to that client in a fast, smart, effective, efficient way, driving improvement for the client and solutions that they'll buy and that they'll pay for, and efficiency within my legal practice. So before I went to the actual tech, I actually made absolutely sure that I understand the client, the problem that the client had, and what knowledge had to move from the law firm into the client's hand to get the items that businesses would truly want to pay for. So being clear on that, I actually then started to look at the technology and how to shape the types of technology that existed to deliver our message in that smart and efficient way. But you also need to look at the architecture inside so I mentioned before, practice management systems, case management system, finance management system, CRM, etc. You need to look at the customer journey. So once you know what problem a client has, that's the client that you want, and you've got the knowledge that will solve it, what technology is going to deliver that? Make sure that then you start to plan that customer journey through the technology, so that the customer isn't then frustrated in getting to the knowledge and the service delivery because it's falling through gaps, etc. So the customer journey, the user experience of your new knowledge delivered in this super smart way has to. So don't look silo in an architectural planned way, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thanks for that insight, Gary. And then we just had one quick question that's come in from our audience. So I was actually going to put this to Mark. And we'll then wrap up. And that's a question from someone called Jim in our audience, and he said, beyond supporting operations and what opportunities do you think tech presents in terms of new revenue opportunities for smaller firms that aren't originally set up in a tech-centric way? So, Mark, just the last quick sort of 60-second thought from you.
Okay, I mean, the immediate response to that is that, say the biggest gains are going to be in terms of support operations and cutting costs, aren't they? I mean, what a smaller high street firm, I imagine, is going to be using tech to use tech to do the things that tech is doing, some of the supervision, keeping everything working on a straight and narrow with workflows, and then let the people that you're paying more money to actually add the creative side. I suppose there are opportunities for growth with tech as well, aren't there? It is a great, it's a great leveler. In the past, 20 years ago, he who had the biggest budget may win. But if you've got a great idea, tech is probably going to help you bring that to market and flourish. So it depends if you've got a bit of imagination and a bit of a thought and something that you want to do that other people aren't doing. That's probably what a smaller firm should be looking to do, see what other firms aren't doing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Gary. I think we've had a fantastic discussion, even if it's just been the three of us. So thank you both for being able to join us today and sharing your valuable insights with our audience. And thank you for being able to sort of give us an insight, particularly from the ABS perspective and from a firm that's looking to embrace and use technology to get through these current times. It's been great to hear from both of you. So thank you very much indeed, both. And we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Cheers, Gary. Cheers, Peter.
Thank you. So welcome now to our fifth conference, the second panel of the day. And our title now is Innovation Build.
Around currently Notting Hill Gate Lab, though it's closed, but very much we've been doing lots virtually here in between.
Thanks, Chris. Stephen.
Hi, I'm Stephen. I look after strategy at Codebase, the largest tech incubator in the UK. I've been working with Barclays for years now, 3 years or so, and been working with Tara as well. I've been working with Sam, so we know each other quite well. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Tara?
Hi, I'm Tara Waters. I'm a partner at Ashurst, which is the technology arm of our new law division, Ashurst Advance.
And Sam.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm the founder and CEO of Office and Dragons. We help lawyers and clients develop transactions efficiently by structuring information in an intuitive way and using that to automatically create and edit. Our office is inside the Notting Hill Gate Eagle Lab, although we don't currently have access. And likewise, really looking forward to the conversation today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sam, and a welcome to all of you. Now, I thought, first of all, it's quite important to sort of scene set in terms of the sort of technology we're talking about when it comes to this panel, because in our last panel, we were looking very much at technology from the sort of medium-sized firm to how they've been able to use that to engage in remote working and to get through current conditions in terms of the global pandemic. We're talking very much about innovation, the cutting edge, the law tech, the artificial intelligence, those issues like blockchain, smart contracts, etc. So I just wanted to sort of first open up and say, can we sort of have a few examples for our audience, really? And bearing in mind, we've got an audience not just from Wales, we've got many people from around the world who today at our conference, just to give them examples of the sort of innovation that we're talking about when it comes to the adoption of law tech and the use of AI.
I can jump in. I guess my starting point of describing, harking back to a statement from Mark Andreessen, a USVC, who said, and that basically means that any kind of workflow, any part of life, frankly, that we can think of is being injected with software. Software is coming into a place and doing work that used to not exist. Part of that would be looking at existing workflows and automating them to some degree. The other part would be that software creates new sort of opportunities. So examples of workflows that are being optimized or automated would be client onboarding or helping out with sort of toil work to get to a better. There's many examples, and indeed, many startup different parts that are emerging. Sam's building one of them. Maybe a good place for him to come in.
Stephen, and of course, you're right at the heart of I've got a thriving law tech investment and community in the UK and very much in London as well. There's some fantastic things happening. Tara, you wanted to come in, and then I'll come to Sam.
Yeah, from a law firm perspective, and the way we're looking at and adopting technology, and in particular artificial intelligence, it's very much about forward about how we should be delivering our services and ways we can do that better for not just ourselves but our clients. And I think it's fair to say that artificial intelligence is one of the we think is going to have a substantive impact on this industry As Stephen said, very much starting out with how do we just automate all the things that we do in a very manual way, and then hopefully, step up through a range of really completely transforming the way we actually tackle new solutions, our life cycles work, so that the aspects that we're very manual or very repetitive can be done in a very intelligent way that mimics the way a lawyer would do it, but in an enabling of the lawyer. The lawyer's role in interaction with the technology starts to show our role as lawyers, starts to evolve in order to work with hand technology.
I think that's a key element there in terms of the fact that, yes, the role of the lawyer is, I think it hasn't done for a very long time, and changing all the time, but quite radically from where it was just a few years ago. I'm going to come out and then Chris. Sam.
Yeah, thanks for that. Jumping off Stephen's point, software world, right? Everything is becoming software. Kind of a really interesting trend in software that we've seen over the last, 10, 20 is we've gone from software to software as a service as the norm. Like things that used to be delivered in just like some software application way are now being delivered more like a service. And I think the same is happening the other way around. Things that were purely services are now shifting to resemble more like that software experience, more like the user experience you get from using a product. Shift has been a lot more pronounced with fintech. Or a traditional banking service has a lot more like a product, right? With things like Monzo, Revolut, Starling, TransferWise, and all these. And that's, I think, fundamentally, customers in the finance sense transact size. We see a big shift happening at businesses, the clients of ours and businesses like Chris's transact as well. The way they get deals faster, it's getting more complex, more competitive, and what it means to deliver an excellent service for them, like what's happened to look different. And I think a lot of that necessarily a replacement of lawyers, but it's thinking about how can that legal service be delivered in an excellent way that fits the way clients work, transact today. So.
A significant evolution. Chris?
Yeah, I think Sam hits a lot of interesting points there, because there is really now a breadth of technology, not just the practice of law, but also the business of law. Demands, certainly from clients like High Street, in terms of what they expect in terms of being able to access legal services is really, and we're seeing a real breadth, therefore, of technologies that are coming through that's not just about the and the AI, but how do you also access legal services? There's people like LawBid that are starting to think about how we can actually build a marketplace. Law Advisor, another that is think about how we can external relationships as an in-house legal function, and also think about transaction management and project management of the transactions. So there is a real breadth of things coming through. Even if we look over at the States, it's building front windows for law together, some really interesting websites that allow us to interact in ways that we never have before. So certainly over the last few months, for sure, we've seen different technologies coming through that are focused on law tech.
That's very interesting, Chris. I just wanted to sort of build on some of the points that were coming out there in terms of, in particular, you highlighted there the fact that we can deliver services in different ways, and I think the experience of the client is potentially going to be quite radically different compared to what they may have, the way they may have received their services in the past. I mean, the 10, 15 years ago, it was, it doesn't all have to be, via hard copy. We can actually do things via email, but we're talking about much more radical delivery now. So I just wanted to quickly ask everyone, if you could give a few examples of some of the more radical ways that services are being delivered, whether it's through an app, whether it's through various different ways. Would anyone like to just sort of share a few insights there? In
the startup space, there's been a lot more of these like self-service things coming up. Seed Legals is a startup in the UK that's been quite successful, but you know, with the success of things like that, you've also got the established firms who used to do these startup incorporations now all following suit. So Cooley's got Cooley Go, Wilson Sonsini has their own product, and it's quite similar. And that, you know, this kind of self-service thing isn't something new. I mean, wills and stuff like that have been self-service online for like a while, but a lot of that is now, I guess you could talk about it, it's like moving up the food chain. And once you start doing it this way here, I mean, you know, it leads you to wonder what's next. I'm sure there's a lot of folks who are out there trying to do something similar for, let's say, small cap or mid cap M&A for private equity and stuff like that. So that's definitely been a change I've seen.
Thanks, Sam. I think that's a really good point. You were just talking there about wills, and it was interesting that I was reading recently about the classic problem with that. Sometimes you might have someone who wants to get a will at a short notice, you know, try and say help a relative who's very ill. And then your traditional experience of getting in touch with a firm could be, you know, struggling to get in touch through a website. You leave voicemail messages, you fill in a contact form, no one comes back to you. You then do get to speak to a human being and they go, well, why wasn't this dealt with sooner? And you're like, well, this isn't helping me with the very real immediate and very upsetting problem that you might have. And yet the fact that these things now are being possible to be delivered in certainly to a semi-automated extent, so people can do certain things online, even if it's, you know, late at night on a Sunday evening, is at least making it more accessible to those who might be in real need. Tara.
Yeah, just sort of saying, I think, you know, I think the real innovation, I think, is the different business models that people within the industry are now looking at, and that really goes to the title, buy, build, you know, partner, invest. You know, your ability to actually capitalize on those types of strategies, mix and match them in a way that suits you, but ultimately all because what you're aiming to do is to deliver your services to the client in the way that they're expecting, or in an actually delightful and unexpected way that really helps to make their lives easier and creates that fantastic customer relationship. And that could be productizing, which, you know, legal techs are doing, some law firms are doing now, including Ashurst. That could be just injecting technology at certain levels within a transaction, where you're using, you know, AI document review to do certain aspects of the transaction quicker, and actually with better accuracy than a human would normally do. But it's really, it's the different mix and match, I think, of the strategies. There's no one way to do anything anymore. There's no one way in law. Actually, there's a multitude of ways. And what we're learning in industries that are much further ahead than us in terms of technology adoption and support is what has really worked well in other industries. And we can now bring them into our industry and start to experiment with how we can propel this industry forward.
Thanks, Tara. I mean, it's an interesting point you make there, in particular to document review. So you're saying not just, I mean, it's often quicker, certainly, than asking a human to do it, but in your estimation, certainly more accurate as well.
I think so, yeah. And you know, it's very hard to measure the human accuracy, but you can measure the computer accuracy actually. And you know, our clients are always very pleasantly surprised when we're able to do a test set of documents with them and say this is 98, 99% accurate. There's always we've come across systems actually that pick up things in documents that probably I wouldn't have in a first review because I'm kind of rushed and it's a standard NDA, so it's like okay, I'm low risk tolerance here. The machines, if you code them the right way and you train them the right way, can pick up things that maybe a human wouldn't actually have done because of the risk tolerance of what they're doing and their capacity on that day.
Thanks very much for the insight, Tara. Chris, then Stephen.
Yeah, sure. And I think just picking up on where the original kind of question started, I think you opened up with what radical stuff is happening out there, and I think the answer to that is there's nothing actually really radical that we're seeing in terms of dramatically changing what's happening. There's plenty that's going on behind the scenes, and I think AI is an awful good example of that. But in terms of have we dramatically changed anything within the industry and offered something new through technology that is radically altering the way that we work, it's not there yet. And I think it's important what Tara was saying there. You know, we are still relatively new on our law tech journey, but what is happening, a lot of people are starting to swarm around it now. You can see that the interest is there, and the people with the great radical ideas are coming to the table. Certainly with the work that we've been doing actually as a group here through some of the sessions that we've run in this bridge program, where we brought people from other industries in to talk about what they're doing and allow us to learn about new ways of doing things, has kind of stoked the fire. I think every one of us is excited about what potential there is, and certainly thinking about what more we could be doing. And I think that's where the strength really comes. There's radical stuff to come because there's radical people that are thinking about what the next bit could look like. But it's still quite early days, so there's some interesting technologies that could get us to the next stage.
Thanks so much for that, Chris. And I mean, you were saying there about sort of looking at certain other industries, and we know about the examples of, for example, fintech, and learning about what a lot of the way that technology has made such a difference there, and technology has been revolutionising the way that accountancy has been delivered for very many years, or decades. But then again, accountancy is a more linear exercise. So I think it's only now with the AI that we're really using that. But so certainly things like fintech and accounting. Are there any other, sorry to put you on the spot, but any other industries where you'd say there's a real opportunity for us to look and see what's been done there and sort of learn from some of the leadership that's been shown?
Look, fintech's the easiest one because I mean it's very close to my heart, certainly within Barclays. But we're seeing an awful lot happening in other industries as well, and certainly across health tech, energy tech. We're even looking at agri-tech, but they're all kind of early days in terms of what they're doing. But I think the big learning that we are getting is actually those people that are involved in those industries are giving us a new way of thinking about things, a new way of approaching the problems that we don't necessarily have not necessarily investigated before. You know, the legal industry is kind of almost on a one-track path. It's hard for us we're risk averse. It's hard for us to step outside of that environment and think about things in different ways. I think that's one of the things that we do get from these other industries, is just opening our minds to looking at things and tackling things in a slightly different way.
Thanks, Chris. I think that's a really good point. Lawyers being risk averse. Very often I think that you could find that you know, deep down they're like a stick of Blackpool rock that says we fear change is very often in there. It's just very often change is not seen as a force for good or a positive. But I think one of the things we need to think about is it can be, and it can revolutionise things. Stephen.
Yeah, just to jump in a general point, I guess. I think what we're talking about is the emergence of new normals. Now, it's kind of odious to say new normals now because of COVID, but we are looking at normalization of new behaviours, and frankly, we're taking those new behaviours from different places. And if you're asking about which are the different sort of industries or verticals that can influence here, it's just day-to-day life. If you start to deliver food with Deliveroo, you've got a new expectation of how to deliver food, and you can go, I wish I could, you know, get a contract the way I can get my food or something like that. Those are the kind of sort of customer expectations that just new technologies enable us to have. And as they come about, we just want new things. The big question is how can you get there? Like, what does the makeup look like of a law firm or a group of people who can make that happen? And I guess to do that stuff, those are the things we can look to fintech for, look to energy tech, look to transport, travel, all those different places, because essentially we're looking at one bucket that's full of domain expertise, how to be a lawyer, how to understand risk, how to understand that your work has to be brilliant, has to be perfect, and then a bunch of practitioners who can build products and build software. And talking about accuracy, I mean, historically, when we first sort of invented calculators, we didn't use calculators to calculate. We used them to check our mental arithmetic. And so we've got paths of how that has worked in the past. And essentially now is new productization coming about. It depends whether, you know, it could be internal, it could be bought, it could be external, it could be partnered, etc. But essentially, to Tara's point earlier, which is super crucial, I think you're looking at the future of a service paradigm for law being almost a kind of curation of different productization moments wrapped around in a deeper, more focused service piece. So in many ways, the new products are there to sort of take care of existing kind of toil work, to let people shine more on what they're really good at, or to add totally new things to do. And working that out is really hard because it does require change, and it's not happened yet. So we don't have this all singing, all dancing, setup. What we have is a lot of emergent little blips and bobs and things coming about, and people scurrying around to work out how they could combine to be a bigger thing. So because of that, it's just a super exciting place at the moment, and I think people are just going to expect brand new things very, very soon, and just motivated from other parts of their lives.
Stephen, and yeah, it's that phrase, the new normal, that we're all getting used to, or the new abnormal, as I keep referring it to, because I don't think normal as it was in January quite the same way again. So, Sam, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, a lot of that definitely resonates. I mean, it's the search for, as Chris started off by saying, and Stephen, but on top of that, it's a new way of working, a new way of delivering those services. And where I think we should be looking, or certainly where we at Office and Dragons are looking, we're looking primarily at various engineering disciplines and primarily around software engineering. And here's why. I mean, when we look at the way lawyers are taught in school and then the way they are taught in the profession, they're taught about the law as a craft, really. It's all about individual work. It's about analyze the case, answer the question, write the essay, and then in the workplace, it's kind of an apprenticeship. You're following along more senior lawyers, and you learn to write the really best documents, and you do all that. But I guess as an analogy, it's really similar, the way I see it, to the way cars used to be manufactured 150 years ago, where they were manufactured by craftspeople, and they built some really fantastic automobiles that way. However, it wasn't until Henry Ford came along and started thinking not about how the individual car is crafted, but about how cars overall are developed, that we got a car in every home, which is, I think, echoes a lot to what Chris was saying, access to services and what we've been talking about, productization, how to get it everywhere. I think it's that next level up of thinking. And I think to Stephen's point, there's a lot out there that is going for the toil work, and some of it's through standardization, some of it's through other means. But there isn't enough looking at that next level up, like how do we support thinking about and deliver from the software world. To take another analogy, it might not be that familiar to everyone, but there are two kinds of things. There are like these programs that take care of toil. Like if there's a really common thing that's repeated all the time, you make a little program where it looks actually a lot like document automation. You answer 3 questions and then it spins up a thing that you need, which is really good for that repeatable, high volume, all the time kind of stuff. But that's not what we need, right? We need to build the Deliveroos and the Slacks and all these other things. We need to build these complex, crazy systems that really make the world run. And in law, we need to do the same thing. We need to capture these complex client matters and transactions. And for that sort of problem, you don't have these, generators. What you have is frameworks. It's not about making a single thing. It's about a way of working. It helps you organize. In our case, is what we're doing. It organizes information, let's say, in one way that you do on all your deals, and it just makes it a bit simpler to get the thing done because you know where to look for the key points. You don't have to dig through a bunch of documents, and that's what frameworks allow you to do. It's a better way of working. So I think a lot of those frameworks as well, I don't think law is very unique. I think the job to be done is pretty similar to other disciplines of various kinds, and we can learn a lot from how engineering has been applied, whether it's to finance, to software, or to lots of other disciplines, to go from there.
Thanks very much, Sam. I think that's that production line, the Henry Ford comparison is incredibly well made and a very powerful one as well. Tara, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that because I think that's a really interesting point. And again, I think if you look at other industries, for the people that are building, etc., the individual, products for this industry, I think then the next logical step, and I think this is where things may start to get very, very interesting, but it's not something that people within the industry are used to doing, is having that mindset of, okay, well, I've built this Slack, but what, and this does this one thing amazingly well. Now I need to plug into these 5 other things that exist out there and create these collaborations and networks across the frameworks so that from the user perspective, they're getting one fantastic end-to-end solution, but actually sitting behind that is, an array of technologies that have been knit together because those companies are open to that concept of working with each other and realize the value that they have to share with one another for the sort of the greater good of the industry, to say something a little bit trite, but true in the sense that you don't want to just have that single point solution. You want to be a component that can slot into that framework and work seamlessly with everything else that's supporting that framework. And that's a real change for this industry, because most law firms in particular, and this may sound unfair, but I think it's true, it's a personal opinion, that, looking outside of can't do everything, and what we need to do is actually connect into the ecosystem to deliver the best service to our clients.
Thanks, Tara. I'm going to come to Stephen and then Chris, but we've also got a couple of questions that have come in, which I'm just keeping to one side for the moment. I'm going to go to Stephen and Chris, but if you do have questions, having a really good discussion on this panel, if you do have any questions, on the YouTube chat, you can put your questions in there and then they're forwarded through to us. So please do feel free to submit some questions for our discussion. So
yeah, sorry. My favorite way to tackle those kind of topics is always through metaphor, and I think that the world's looking for new metaphors, and as Sam referenced, maybe for some of those metaphors is a good place to start. Certainly when you're building software products, ontology of what you're offering. And what Tara just said is also her opinion, but I completely agree with it. And there's lots of ramifications from that. I think in one way, there's a search for some kind of, to add another metaphor, operating system for law. And then there's a search for apps to be put on top of that to look at different specializations. And by doing that, we also look at one of the biggest challenges, which is just access to justice in some case, because something we've all mentioned before is business models as well. And I forget the number, but I've spoken to many lawyers over the last couple of years, and people tell me reliably that there's something like 5 or 10 or something like that problems or legal problems that every individual has without even knowing it. And so if we're all going to use software to book, transport, and feed ourselves and find the loves of our lives with, then it stands to reason that we should be using software for accessing justice as well. And as we come together and build those kind of standards or operating systems or reference points, whatever you want to call them, that process itself is super hard. And it's hard because what's the business model around it? How's risk to be understood? Who's going to build those things? What are the conversations? And again, there are metaphors that can help there. Things like open source or frenemy or all those kind of cool Silicon Valley words. It's not about just sort of one-to-one mimicking that stuff. It's about letting that level of discourse flow into what you're doing so that you can understand risk in a new way that allows you to sit down and think that, okay, we've got a business model that's, by and large kind of per diem rates based and very much service focused. So if we build products, what would the business model look like? How do they intersect with that service piece, and how does the whole thing start to run with APIs and AI and blockchain and all these kind of things? And I think that's crystallizing and becoming clear. But one of the things that's becoming clear as that discourse happens is that perhaps we'll need a new structure within the law firm to be able to. I'm just one eye looking at some of the questions that were just asked there. Maybe that's one of the huge challenges is what is the culture of a law firm that can have an honest debate about all these new trends and how can they react?
I think that sort of strategy piece across the firm in terms of having those discussions is incredibly important. And funny enough, it's something that came up quite a bit in yesterday's sessions as well. So I think that's an incredibly well-made point there, Stephen. Chris, I'm going to ask you a question that we've had in from our audience, from Alan Carton, and he's asked, lawyers need to be talking more deeply to clients about their new expectations with technology and innovation in mind to make the right decisions on what to develop, particularly when risk averse. Are lawyers talking to clients enough along these lines?
I need to be careful because this is one that I could talk at length around, and I'll pick up on also Tara's and Stephen's points as well before. Where the bottom line is no, we're not having enough of those conversations. But also, even if you were to have the conversations, I don't know that the client's clear enough in terms of their own strategic objectives and their own relationship with technology to be able to give a good enough answer. As a practical example, when we certainly my previous role in Barclays, I was managing the external panel of law firms that we have, and we did through an exercise of resetting our expectations, we focused on innovation and technology and did deep dives with 30 of our firms into what they were doing around growth and innovation, and it was probably one of the most interesting / depressing / exciting sets of conversations that we had, because we learned so much in that some were doing less than what we thought they were doing. Others were doing so much more than we were being told about, and actually we could immediately start to go and do more with. And we also met a whole load of people that we'd never been interacting with, and those being the people that were really thinking about how to innovate and change the way that they operate and do things in different ways. So a resounding success in terms of being able to do that exercise, but really kind of fired us up to do more and think about what more we could do in that space. So it's definitely, and I think across the board, lawyers and law firms need to spend more time with their clients and more time listening to their clients to understand what it is that's going on, what their real needs are, because we're also not great at really explaining those. And there was a great piece of work that was done a couple of years ago around voice of the client, which was super interesting. So I think it's absolutely right that you do need to have more of those conversations, but go in knowing that the client doesn't necessarily always have the answers. But I think the key bit there is being able to open up those conversations and start to collaborate. And just dipping quickly back into what Tara was saying before, law firms have typically worked on their own to do things, and with technology, I think that has become an area where, again, they're reluctant to evolve or at least release more information around what they're doing, when it's probably the wrong approach to take, because technology is not going to set you apart from the rest. It's what you do with that technology in terms of the service that you deliver to your clients that will differentiate you. So you can release things a little bit more, and there's a lot to be said, and we talk about it a lot in terms of law firms collaborating, because you'll help to solve problems for your client faster. You'll be able to do it with less expense, and you're also sharing that risk out across a group of you. If we've got 30 different law firms that are coming to Barclays saying we've got a tech solution that we'd like to deploy to make life easier for you, there's no way I can take 30. And there's plenty of problems with us being able to adopt technology. But if maybe 4 of our firms came together and said, we've got one thing that's going to help you in this particular space, suddenly it's an interesting conversation. And we've tested it. We've done a few collaborations with our law firms, of which Tara is one of our great law firms that we do work with over at Ashurst, in terms of coming together around sets of problems and seeing what we can come up with. And we've kind of done 2 exercises around that, and it gets better each and every time that we do it. Firms are really comfortable with each other, almost to the point of where we've seen presentations where firms have been, I don't know if we can, I'm sure there'll be corp comms teams getting very upset about merging logos just for internal presentations, don't worry. But it's just a different way of thinking, and that opening of the minds which helps to drive things forward.
Thanks very much for that, Chris. Sorry, Stephen, was your hand still just to come in quickly on that, or? No, it wasn't. Okay.
No, sorry. No. All good.
No worries. Thank you. I'm just going to get, unless anyone's got anything else to add, I was going to come to another question, and this has been submitted by Chris, who has said, I hear commoditized wills are leading to a significant problem with interpretations of provisions landing in Part 8. Now, I'm going to ask this one, and I'm going to be a bit cheeky and pick someone out. Sam, you were very given commoditization, productization, and the production line. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it's one of those answers where some things are and some things are not. So that there are certain things, and LegalZoom and Rocket Lawyer especially have made fantastic businesses out of them that are really your 150,000th employment letter agreement or something, and you really probably those things can boil down to one standard form, fill in a few slots, and get it done. But I think that there are a lot of things which don't reduce that way. One of the biggest things, so document automation, which is what a lot of these things are based on, that's actually been around since like the 70s. And within law firms, I mean, from what we've seen, at least in Tara, maybe you'll disagree, it hasn't exactly been widely used. And one of the big reasons we hear is that, well, it doesn't fit because the work that we, the lawyers we're talking to, do is bespoke. It's not the 150,000th employment letter. The documents are different for every deal that we do. Sometimes we're using client forms, sometimes something else. And not to mention, they happen with an urgency. They need to be done really quickly. So we don't have the time to invest in setting up a generator for this kind of thing where we tackle every 150 million permutations. And for that kind of thing, I think that, we see that as totally right. And so when you run into that, I think the approach is kind of like with the metaphor I was making earlier, not to standardize, say, the documents, but to put in some standardization about the way you do deals. It's about not automating, the template. It's about the process of how you work. It's about putting in place a framework that supports you to do deals, any deal. I'm not talking about deals because that's our field, but it can be any client matter, in a way that's just less confusing, more clear and more transparent, in a way that lends itself to, let's say, even simple automations that allow you to deliver faster. And really crucially, in a way that you're capturing some of that knowledge from the deal you do. Because one of the biggest things in my practice as an M&A lawyer was that every deal I did, right, terrible, we're up all night, we finally get it over the line. But it's overshadowed by the fact that we've got another deal starting the next day. And although we finished that first deal and I've learned something right about the deal and I've got some documents, I haven't really captured that knowledge, that experience in a way that I can really plug it in and meaningfully make the next deal easier for myself. So even before we get to the AI and whatever, as long as we're at least capturing some of that knowledge in a way that's combinable, in a way that can be plugged into something someday, I think that's going to move the needle a lot. So I guess bottom line, when you can't automate and standardize things, think about just the way you're working and put in place a framework, some standardization that makes the way you work easier.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that, Sam. I'm going to come back to you on that point with regards to framework in a minute. But Tara, I just wanted to see if you wanted to disagree there, because Sam gave you the opportunity. So I just wanted to see what your thoughts were.
I didn't want to disagree. I think document automation is probably one of the quote unquote new technology tools that has actually been in a lot of law firms for quite some time. There are well-known incumbent providers as well as a whole slate of new providers that are providing, that are offering. But I think if you look at any law firm, none of them have completely automated, for example, all of their standard form agreements. Every law firm and every practice group would have at least a handful, if not more, of standard form agreement they use as their starting point when they're drafting documents of all types of varying lengths. I completely agree with Sam that, of course, not everything, into an automatable form and can be boiled down into some level of code. But I think what's important also to keep in mind and is important for, technology companies, people in roles like mine within law firms, is to challenge that concept of, oh, this is too specialized and bespoke, to boil it down into that form. And to give you a clear example, we are right now working with someone in our finance, trying to build a product based on a new piece of regulation that's coming into force. The regulation is not very long, but it's complex. It's something that would take, a person fresh 10 hours to actually read it, understand it. Where does it boil down to? What's the advice I need to give to my client? And so you could easily say this could not possibly be automated. But what we've done is we've worked with her over several months to help her redefine the way she thought about the regulation and how she analyzed it, to actually come up with a framework for how to turn, that 10-page document produced by the EU into programmable information that we could automate. And that, from her perspective, we asked her for her feedback, and for her, that was a real change in the way she thought about how she did her job, because she was thinking about how is the client meant to ingest this information in a more automated and technology-based form rather than me writing her a memo. And she was able to evolve over several months the analysis in a way that actually worked really well and hopefully will produce a really interesting and different product And I think what's important is that we need to do that exercise with so many lawyers in our firm to challenge that initial perception that things can't be automated. And actually, I think you'll find that it is wider. There are absolutely aspects that are not going to be automatable. But I think that, the hard no is clearly something that we need to kind of continuously challenge.
Thanks, Tara. Steve, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just to nitpick a little bit on the words commodification versus productization. Commodification is directed at a business model essentially, or understanding value that's it's a commodity, it's a P&L moment. The difference between that and building a product is really, and I don't use this word lightly, is the magic of iteration. And iteration is magical. If you start off with a product, it's like the maps we used to have in the Middle Ages where we had this sort of there be dragons moments in the corners because people just hadn't sailed there yet. But once we do sail there, you do start to see a better way of that. There's an island there and there's a little bit of land there and there's some stuff there, and you fill in those maps and you draw it out. And the more you work on a product, the more you iterate it, and the more that product starts to anticipate more eventualities, more weirdness, frankly, more of the things that normally humans are really good at and computers are really bad at. A lot of that just boils down to lots and lots and lots of exposure. So I'd really try and urge us to get away from thinking that the older kind of template automated things that no one's ever used in any industry, right? What we're talking about here is really something different. A part of it's what Sam was talking about with sort of process iteration, that you're learning that, hey, the outcome is not like a template you can use again and again and again. It's that you understand that a process is being created that lets you work in a different way and work in a more automated way. So there's lots of sophistication in all those different parts. But really what we're talking about is the magic of iteration and tight loops, that if you send that product out to people and let it be used, that we can build these things. Because if you're not engaged with technology and you don't really understand the iteration process, you think that products kind of fully formed just appear on the market and that they just magically somehow do the thing that you want them to do. But actually there's loads and loads creating, version 1, version 2, version 3, version et cetera, that kind of gets there. And the interesting thing is that lawyers know that because they iterate contracts essentially, but it's taking that kind of intelligence and that understanding to the product space. And that's an ongoing thing. Again, the question is, what kind of firm, who do you have to hire to do that? How do you find those people that understand that?
Thank you for that insight, Stephen. I think that's an incredibly important point in terms of the development of this. I just wanted to switch back to something that Sam was mentioning there and just build on that in terms of the sort of challenge with regards to a framework and the importance of it. So I just wanted to sort of ask the question, what organizations we need to think about when they're developing the framework? How should they be approaching it? What does a good framework look like that they can then seek to follow and put in place?
I mean, I could start on that one. For us, I think it's about, you'd want to start with the outcomes. What are you looking to deliver? And the framework should be geared towards delivering that. In the law firm context, I think, generally law firms want to work with great clients and do great work and be successful, businesses. And we see that being built, of course, upon, clients choose lawyers. Maybe Chris will disagree, but because of excellent reputation. Reputation is really key, and you develop a great reputation by delivering excellent service. And when we look at excellent service, what that's starting to mean to clients today, 3 things that we see are a desire for transparency and clarity, to be able to understand what's going on in the work, like what the terms of the deals are, if it's deals without confusion. It's instant delivery, or if not instant, it's something approaching that, right? Clients generally expect that once deal terms are agreed and they know it's to be done, that contracts and such should be, produced pretty quickly. And then increasingly data-driven decision-making, looking to other industries. I think there's now, it's kind of creeped in that they don't just want the decision of one or a couple individuals. They want to know that data is being looked at and bolstering and strengthening that decision-making. So in choosing a framework to adopt, or in our case, in developing a framework for folks to use, we'd want a framework that's really geared to driving, in our case, those three outcomes. But in your case, if you think another three outcomes or another set is most important, then I would think really gearing it towards delivering those is the thing to do.
Thanks, Sam. I'm going to come to Chris and then Tara. Chris.
Yeah, so I think frameworks mean different things to different people, and certainly depending on where you're sat. If I look at it from our in-house perspective, and what we need to put together, I think it's all about really truly understanding what your problems and what your issues are. You need to really get to the bottom of those, do some process mapping, look at the data that you have available to you, and really focus on where there are opportunities. Because if you're not clear on that problem that you need to have solved, then you're going to really struggle to find the solution on the other side of it. There's no one size fits all in terms of framework, and every organization is different in their approach and the people that they have to be able to do these things. But bringing together that group that is at least focused on it, so bringing the right people to the table and then enabling them to take things away and action things, and whether it's financing in some way, shape or form, and cost constraints are something that we always talk about in-house. But it's at least being able to enable and empower the people that you have involved in terms of thinking about what your tech strategy looks like and being clear around what those problems are that influence that tech strategy that you're putting forward.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Tara?
Yeah, I love the word framework, and in our team we use that instead of the word process. And in setting up our team and the ongoing learnings that we've had over the past 18 months, my impression has been that when you say process, people think of something linear, and that's really something we try to get away from in what we're trying to do. So, from my perspective, and this echoes, some of the things Chris and Sam have already said, which is it's a little bit of an outline of a process with a clear endpoint, with clear sort of gates or decision making or inflection point that feeds into the entirety of what happens at the end, so that you're achieving whatever the end goal is. But it really needs to be adaptable and flexible. That's why I like framework better, because depending on the circumstances and the facts, little bits of it need to change. And you also need to be able to, ideally in some way, automatically ingest the learnings as you go, and the framework stays the same, but what happens in between the inflection points evolves over time, because ultimately, I think of it, and when I think ultimately there's this point when the theory, we can read all the books and read the Harvard Business Review articles and the case studies, but it's the theory meeting reality, and as Chris said, every company, every firm's reality is different. And so there is no one way to do anything in any organization. There's probably multiple ways to do multiple things. And what you want is that framework is to create some boundaries for you to work within, knowing you're going to get to that end result in a really rigorous way that ticks all the process boxes that everyone else, all the other stakeholders want you to tick, but allows you that freedom and flexibility in between to adapt to the reality, to just frankly get the work done. Because if you set the process up front, you're just going to be like, okay, I'm creating paperwork, I'm ticking boxes, but am I actually achieving and getting the doing done? And that's the main thing. And you really, it's really difficult, especially when you're starting up something new, to shift off the theory and say, okay, that's nice and interesting, and I'm learning lots from outside sources, but what actually works for us, this team, and that will be very different from what you hear other people do.
Thanks, Tara. Stephen, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, again, in the software world, there's a religious war going on between so-called agile and waterfall principles, and what Tara just said reminded me a lot of that. I from what it's worth, I come down on the side of what Tara just spoke about. So I think what we're really looking to do is create forgive me, but create some kind of safe space as well. Mistakes. So Sam, everyone really has referenced learning through a process. So just using the word process in the widest possible way there. And learning is, about repeatability and about mental shortcuts and doing things faster in the future and all that kind of stuff, and having a kind of sedimentation layer of stuff that we can sort of hold on to. And again, in product management, there's an awful lot of space for taking that kind of thinking and chronicling mistakes, chronicling errors, fixing things in real time, trying to innovate on that process or that framework. And I agree. I think there's almost a kind of standing on the shoulders of giants moment for the legal vertical in that sense of just looking what fintech has done. This goes right back to the very first question you asked. Looking right now in the world of bits as opposed to the world of atoms, we just have the possibility to have those tighter iteration loops again, and they don't not only bring forward a good product hopefully, but also a good kind of structure or framework around how that product got built in the first place. Again, it's a cultural challenge, but I think that's really interesting, and as that thinking starts to permeate the law world, I think back to what Chris said at the very beginning, I think that's when you'll start to see the really big things happening that will come in.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Stephen. As you say, it's looping back to just the very essence in terms of the discussion, really. I just wanted to sort of move on to then ask the question that in terms of what sort of data do you think should decision makers be looking at in order to inform their decisions and help them when it comes to the I suppose in terms of being able to give effective oversight and then monitor things going on from there as well.
I'm happy to do a starter on this one. I think kind of where I'd start with is whatever you've got, because it's one of the hardest things I think you have in terms of making decisions as to where you're going to deploy resource or where you're going to focus in terms of bringing technology in is super difficult, but you can't just do it on a whim and a feeling. You need something tangible at the back end of that helps to direct you in the right way, so that you ultimately, what you want to do is make sure that you really drive a significant result, and you need to have measures and markers in place that show that there has been a significant change from where you've started. And look, it's not easy, but there are pieces out there, and certainly we, much to the delight of many of our lawyers internally, we started putting time recording in-house so we could start to identify where time is being spent, but most significantly starting to direct us in terms of where there were opportunities for us to make a change. We did significant process mapping across the organisation, again, to identify where there was challenges, but it started ultimately to give us that real power in terms of having data that started to identify where we should be looking in terms of what we could be doing next, where there were opportunities for problems to be solved, and how they could be solved through either tech or changing processes. So it's not easy. You can start from a blank slate, and you could start to capture data in some sophisticated way, but you'll need to bring technology in through the door. Use what you've got. Excel is always going to be your friend in some way, shape or form. It's just being able to find a starting place.
Tara.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of data-driven decision-making, which can be really difficult in this space in particular, because usually it's the first time you're trying to do that, and there's not a lot of comparative metrics out there. We all hold our cards close to our chest. I think one of the first things, actually taking a step back, and this will be a topic near and dear to all of our hearts, actually, is the decision makers need to actually understand how to make the decision. In most law firms, they don't know how to do that. And you need to start to think a bit more like an investor or a VC and understand what level of risk tolerance you have, understand the portfolio approach and how you mitigate those risks through something like that. So I think up front, what you need is, honest discussions amongst the decision makers. What are we trying to achieve? What are the metrics and KPIs we'd like to be introduced in this firm, in the innovation space? Articulate that then to the people who are meant to be delivering on that. And then the person meant to be delivering, i.e. someone like me, can then say, okay, great, here's my strategy for how to achieve that. And here's how I'm going to feed back to you that I'm hitting those metrics. And I think the setting the metrics point is really important. And they need to be more than just financial, because the investment in these types of initiatives, it's a medium to long-term investment. You're not, in most circumstances, you're not going to see the full return on the investment in the first year, right? You know, it takes some time. You have to gain the traction. You have to develop new skills within your team or bring new skills in. It takes time to learn to do things in our, you know, legal industry environment. And that needs to be clear up front, and there needs to be an acceptance of that and a willingness to actually invest the time. But at the end of the day, I think, you know, there's this phrase that someone said it to me about a year ago, and I just repeat it all the time to everybody, which is, you know, you achieve what you measure. So if you want to achieve anything, you have to have clear KPIs of what you're looking to achieve. And you may not hit them because it's difficult and it's going to take many years, and no one's crushed it yet. No one's trying to solve this problem that no one solved yet. But if you don't have those metrics that, in particular, those metrics that look beyond financial return, you're just not going to be able to prove back to the decision makers what you've accomplished. And then, you know, frankly, this industry has a history of, you know, getting excited and then there's no immediate value from their perception, and then it just goes away. And what we can't have is that cycle to continue, because this is actually vital for this industry, that we are propelled forward and that we are actually taking innovation seriously, not a buzzword, but actually vital to this industry being able to provide the services that, you know, our clients and our customers and the people out on the street need in order to continue to progress in this world. So I think, you know, that's sort of my evangelical speech on that topic.
Thanks, Tara. I think that's incredibly valuable, using the data as the evidence really to inform. I'm going to come to Stephen quite quickly, and then in the last 5 minutes, we just had one more question from the audience, which I want to finish on. Stephen.
Just briefly on metrics, and I guess there's levels. Level 0 is you don't measure anything. And then just, again, sorry for saying it, just iterate on them and make sure we're measuring the right things. The sad thing is that all of that requires time. Like developing a North Star metric, for example, you know, there's a whole conversation about trailing indicators and leading indicators and all that kind of stuff. And ironically, the law world's got loads and loads of data, loads, but not so much on those vital questions. And it's really, you know, my thing is to say, look how valuable we think all that other data is. To transpose that kind of value understanding to this new set of stuff and use that to make decisions. And we're going to get it wrong, and blah, blah, but we need to sort of culturally understand that we need to do that. And again, there's loads. But I think it's really exciting because, again, it'll fuel that iteration and just make things happen more quickly.
Thanks very much for that, Stephen. We've had one quick question I wanted to see if we could answer, which is, do you think legal firms should be investing in startups? And I can see Chris grinning.
Okay, I mean, I'm very conscious Sam's watching me as well. I've got two answers to this. I think, number one, firms should be spending time with startups. I think that more than anything else, open your doors, have conversations with these startups, help to influence the way that they are going, because you've got such important knowledge and data that you can be sharing with these firms. Data's another one for another day. But definitely, that's number one. You should be investing your time, certainly, in some of these startups to help them on their way and get involved. And then ultimately, I mean, should legal firms be investing in startups? If they are investing, I don't want every other law firm to then suddenly run away from that piece of technology, because going back to kind of what Tara was saying at the beginning, you know, law firms are very protective of their empires, and often rightly so, but less so, as I've said, around the technology piece. So startups need investing in, and who better to do that than the people that are going to be using those technologies? You know, it completes the kind of circle of life, as it were. But not to the expense of everybody therefore using it, because as we've said across all of us, I think we need to be opening up law tech across multiple law firms, multiple clients.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that, Chris. And indeed, thank you very much indeed to our panel for what I think has been a fantastic discussion in terms of really sort of lifting the bonnet and getting into grips with some of the law tech and the issues that are out there in terms of what the profession needs to be thinking about. So can I thank you all so much for being able to donate your time to speak to our audience today and sharing such valuable insights. I think it's been incredibly useful for our audience. So yes, thank you all very much. We're now going to be going on to our final panel of the day, which is on health and well-being and the impact of technology. And we'll be starting that in just a few minutes. Thank you all very much. Thank you. So welcome back to our final panel session of the day and the final panel of our conference, panel number 6, Health and Wellbeing, the Impact of Technology. And we are joined on our virtual stage by our final expert panel. And I'm going to now pass over to each one of them individually just to give a quick introduction so they can introduce themselves. And we'll start off with David.
Hi everyone, my name's David Beanie. I'm one of those people who had a very normal career for 36 years working in media, but I was hiding a secret. And that secret was that I was battling in private with my mental health. Even I didn't realize at the time that nobody in my world had a clue that I battled every day with panic attacks and anxiety. Well, my whole life changed forever 4 years ago when I outed myself for the first time. And it was one of the best things I've ever done. It resonated with more people and at a deeper level than anything I've done in my life before. However, and it's a really big however, lots of people came up to me and said, David, thanks for sharing your mental health story. Today I realized I'm normal, but I'm going to be honest with you. I could never share with my employer my true mental health because I think it would have a negative impact on my career. And the more and more I shared my own mental health stories, more and more people shared with me that they could never talk openly in the workplace about their mental well-being. So I made a massive decision at the beginning of 2017 that where I needed to focus my energy was helping organizations to create kinder cultures of trust in the workplace. And it led me to form my business called Breaking the Silence. And I've been lucky enough to work with many organizations in recent years around kindness. That very much includes the Law Society and lots of different law firms. So it's a real privilege to be here today talking about the value of kindness in the workplace, particularly at a tough time like this at the moment. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, David, and thank you for bringing up kindness. That is actually something that we referenced in our first panel of the day, where when it was talking about how should we be reacting to the difficulties of working from home now, the difficulties of dealing with these different challenges, and the speakers were united in saying that element of kindness is incredibly important. So thank you for bringing it up, I'm sure, session. Almeth.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Peter. I'm Professor Almut McDowell. I'm a dry, stuffy academic based at Birkbeck, University of London, where I'm an academic lead. As a woman, a rare species in a STEM subject, there are far too few female professors. So I've known a glass cliff or two. Unlike David, I've had a rather roundabout career path. I actually started off my career as a classically trained dancer, then worked as a personal trainer for many years, which then brought me into psychology. Indeed, I still teach dance-based fitness classes online, so do join me. It's one of the best things you can do for your mental health is to keep physically active. My research is on occupational health, work-life balance, but also professional competence. So I do a lot of work with the police. I do a lot of work in the third sector. I do a lot of work in the finance sector. And I'm also doing some work in a legal environment. Indeed, one of my PhD students still is a practicing solicitor, and she is looking at the well-being of law professionals, because believe it or not, there is not an awful lot of research at the moment to guide best practice. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing up the issues around the importance of exercising at the moment. For me, it's been long distance running this year, and then a little bit of yoga to balance out the need to stretch after the long distance running. But there you go. Helen.
Thank you very much for having me as well, Peter. I'm Helen Gatsey, a leadership and performance coach, and I specialise in working in both the legal and technology sectors. In particular, working on resilience and adaptability, as well as elevating relationships and communication. And I'm similarly, I had a different career previously. I was actually a qualified solicitor, working both in London itself and also internationally in China and Tanzania. And I very much came to this work through seeing many of the struggles and challenges in the legal sector. And it was really from there that I started my own practice. Also very excited to be here. I'm really looking forward to the panel today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helen, and thank you to all of our panelists there for that introduction. So I want to start off by asking the question, really, let's get to the heart of it. Mental health, has it been a blind spot for our profession, for the legal profession in the past? Don't know who'd like to pick up that one first.
I'm happy to go first on that, Peter. I think it's been a blind spot for every profession, to be fair. I think that some progress has been made around the stigma of mental health in recent years, but let's not kid ourselves. We still have an incredibly long way to go. Mental health is the final taboo in the workplace, and why have we left it to last? Because it's the most difficult one to deal with. It's not just the workplace stigma. It's so deep-rooted in society. We actually bring it into the workplace. Do you have more challenges in the legal profession than some? Yes, I believe you do. We only have to picture that very, the alpha male lawyer. It's very difficult for a lawyer to admit, compared to some professions, that they might be struggling with their mental health. And this, I always believe in being very straight in my talking. I still believe there's a huge disconnect between senior partners in law firms and the rest of the company. Many law firms have addressed or tried to address mental health in the last few years. And in lots of cases, they've recruited people like mental health champions or well-being champions. And it's almost like they think by doing that, they've addressed the subject. But to me, mental health in the workplace is not about training up a few people on mental health. It took me 5 years to qualify, and it's still a very difficult role. Mental health in the workplace is all around culture. It's around, I'm going to bring that word in, kindness again, Peter. It's all about creating kinder cultures where employees feel safe to open up and talk about this subject. And where I think a lot of law firms have looked at mental health, they haven't really addressed their culture from the very top of the organization. Too many senior partners are not happy to talk openly about their own mental health challenges or where mental health has touched their life. I was at the Institute of Directors a few years ago, and someone bravely said to the audience, if you're really serious about mental health, when you go back to the workplaces, you'll share your own mental health story. And he said, I know when I'm saying that, a lot of you will think, well, I haven't got a mental health story to tell. But as I said just now, it's touched everybody's lives somewhere. One of the best examples I've seen, I obviously won't name them, but I was working with a very reputable law firm, and I was talking about how important it is to share your own vulnerabilities. And when you share your vulnerabilities, you inspire people around you. And at this point, the managing partner of the law firm stood up and said, okay, the real reason David Beanie's here today is because I'm currently, and people were open-mouthed. They were absolutely shocked that the most senior partner in that firm was sharing with them that he's in therapy. But it was a great moment. And what happened within the next half an hour? He created an I'm Spartacus moment, because the moment he sat down, another senior partner stood up and said, okay, I'll be honest, I struggled with my mental health about 5 years ago and had, I guess, what you'd refer to as a breakdown. And then they sat down, and then another senior partner stood up and said, okay, in the spirit of being honest, I lied on my CV. I didn't mention that 12 years ago, I had struggles with depression. I still work with that law firm now. What happened on that day, they created permission for everyone in that law firm to be honest about their mental well-being. So just going back to your original question, it has been a blind spot right across not just the legal industry, but every industry. But in law firms, we still have a long way to go. A long way to go, although there is some really good work taking place. Thank you, Peter.
No, thank you, David. Alma.
Thank you, David, for your insights. I think there are two things which we also have to put on the table, which are about how work is done in organized in law. Billable hours have a lot to answer for, where you have to account for every single 5 minutes of your day. It makes people overwork. and it puts an emphasis on quantity and the hours that you work rather than the quality of service that you provide. So billable hours have a lot to answer for. Also, the way that work is now organized in the legal profession. In the good old days, you would have had clerks and legal secretaries who would filter inquiries. That no longer is the case. So a lot of client inquiries actually come directly to the professionals. There is no filter. So not only are you engaged in what really is cognitively very, very complex work. Law isn't easy, right? Let's be honest about this, which is why it takes years and years and years to train. So you're conducting work that requires an awful lot of concentration, but you're being continuously interrupted. That is not easy to deal with. So that is a real challenge. Plus, let's also think about the kind of people that law perhaps attracts, because can we just be honest? You have to be a bit of a perfectionist to work in law, because you have to be extremely diligent and detail focused. So yes, you do need to be perfect because you mustn't miss anything, but perfectionism can very quickly turn into what we call in psychology maladaptive perfectionism, where your expectations of yourself are so high that you're almost setting yourself up to fail. So it's a perfect storm, right, of having been too accountable for every single 5 minutes that you work, for not having a buffer and support, because all psychological research tells us you can actually deal with a lot of stress and strain in your working environment if you have adequate support. And also thinking about the personal characteristics that people might bring to law, where they have very, very high expectations of themselves. So I think we need to talk about this combination and how best to support that.
I think really interesting that you mentioned the billable hour, the chargeable hours that always ends up exerting a degree of pressure, and very often is referred to as sort of the tyranny of the billable hour. From that perspective, do you think sort of more innovative ways of working and delivering services, like things like moving to subscription models, so that lawyers are actually just delivering a service rather than necessarily doing it by that sort of the rigidity of that hour? Do you think that actually helps to sort of break out from that mentality?
Absolutely. It's something to think about. Talk now in the AI literature that actually legal work might be one of the types of work that in the future could partly be done by algorithms, because you could train algorithms actually to trawl through legal cases and so on and so forth. And perhaps we need to think about it. You know, are there some duties which really have to be done by legal professionals? You know, but yes, can we restructure in a work that is more meaningful? I think that's something else that we need to talk about, is making work meaningful again. We don't talk about that enough. Again, there's a whole literature on that. Actually, if you want to protect people's mental health, one of the things that really helps to protect us and keep us engaged is actually finding meaning in everything that we do. And I think that's another topic that we mustn't neglect, and think about not only making work more efficient, but also making it more meaningful for the people who undertake the work.
Thanks. Helen?
Yes, absolutely agree with everything you say, Almith. And just to expand a little bit on that as well, from the type of people that become lawyers to the high standards that are expected by nature of being a lawyer. And this permeates every level, from very junior trainees right the way up to partnership. Within your peer groups, there's always pressure, but so it's vertical and horizontal. And this means that, day in, day out, it's coming at you from all angles, because by nature of being a lawyer, the quality of your work has to be at that level. So that's definitely a massive thing that's always present in the legal profession, which does lead to people suffering more with their mental health. And in terms of going back to the question and looking at, has the profession turned a blind eye? I think certainly it's much slower than a lot of other industries in really putting things in place that are effective. And I make that distinction because, you know, a lot of law firms over the past 5 to 7 years have put different processes or different schemes in place, but there's not much done around the measurement of the effectiveness of these. So it's all really understanding what's going to benefit the employees and the partners the most. So in that regard, I would say, you know, it really has been, you know, blind eye has been turned for many years about the effectiveness of these policies.
Thanks, Helen. David, you wanted to come in?
It was just when Alma talked about lawyers, you know, they work in this culture where they think they have to be perfect. And Helen's also brought up this thing about quality. I'm often asked how I've largely won my battle with panic attacks. And it took me a long time to work it out, but I've realized I've lowered the bar. I've realized that every time I do a talk now, I don't have to be perfect. It is okay not to be okay. And I've learned to become kinder to myself. And I guess I've discovered what they call self-compassion. So when I'm working with lawyers, you know, I'm trying to emphasize that you don't have to be perfect. It really is okay not to be okay. And if we can help embed that culture within law firms, I think we'd help everybody's mental well-being. We need to help people to discover the value of self-compassion, Peter. Thank you.
No, I want to sort of move on now. So we've sort of talked there about the challenge of mental health in the profession. But how has technology potentially made this problem worse this year? You know, in the new abnormal that we're now in 2020 with pandemics, working from home, then being asked to come back to the office, and then some more working from home, and the uncertainty and the relying on technology. So how has technology potentially made the problem worse? Helen, do you want to come in on that?
Sure, of course. I mean, in my view, it's really accelerated and exacerbated at no end. I think actually one of the biggest things that's happened is the level of miscommunication that's really increased through, you know, whether it's through Slack or different chatting messages or emails or whatever the written form is. There's so much scope for misunderstanding, and because people aren't having that in-person contact, it's building up a lot of anxiety and a lot more worry, and again there's a lot of time spent on people being on different pages, and this just is creating lots of problems within teams and also company-wide. But really, from the individual's perspective, I think because we've had to work remotely, lack of human connection is something that's really affecting people's work and their performance, but also how they're feeling in their well-being and their energy levels. And it's something obviously that's completely unprecedented, and we very much took for granted before. But really that element of human connection, because we are separated by technology, is really having a detrimental impact on people. And this leads to people working more in silos, which again builds up worry and concern, and also this further misunderstanding as well. So they're the main things for me, as well as a sense of, you know, isolation, which obviously is one of the most detrimental factors to someone's mental well-being as well.
Thanks, Helen. I'll come to Almuth and then David. Almuth.
Thank you. So digital working, where we work in virtual teams, can actually work very well and as effective as face-to-face teams. If you do the setup face-to-face and you establish that baseline of trust and you establish ways of working and you clarify expectations. Now that didn't happen, right? Because we all got thrown in at the deep end. I had less than 24 hours, you know, university gave us notice. Well, university is closing. If you want to get a few textbooks, you've got today, and then that is it. So we had no opportunity to manage that transition, neither did other organizations. And where I think we've done far too little is to backtrack our steps and go back a step and say, hang on a minute, we're now in a, in a virtual team setting. How can we make it work for us? What do you need from us, people? What can we actually do that is helpful to everybody? Because there is one big rule in managing organizational change, and that is communication, communication, communication. You can't ever communicate enough to make sure that expectations are clear, to make sure that everybody is heard, to also make sure that you're checking in on people. And that is a tough thing to do when you're leading digitally, right? I can sometimes see it in our team meetings. I think, oh, so right today, but then you're off to the next Zoom call. And often you don't have the slack in the day-to-day working day to make sure that you're checking in on people. So I think the onus is on us, really, on everybody, to make sure that we've established ways of working that work for everybody, that we've got good communication scanners. I'm so, so see what Helen was saying earlier, the opportunity for miscommunication, but also to miscommunications, which have been really, really essential, is huge, right? Because it's so easy to miss that email or that message on Yammer or Slack. And of course, we've all got multiple channels going on at the moment. This is a tough thing to manage. And I think we need to allow ourselves more slack in a working day, where we give each other time to actually manage our virtual days of working. This is now part of our job, but actually, show me one job description, right, where that is made explicit. People just don't, but it's part of what we need to be doing day in, day out, and we need to recognize that, and we need to formalize that much more.
I think that's an incredibly important point, and I think it almost leads on, but almost talking now about the problem of Zoom fatigue, where I've spoken to some people who've sort of had, a morning made up of 4 different calls, and then they sit down at lunchtime thinking, I had a whole load of things I needed to do today, and I've not even started on them because I've been sat in 4 different calls telling people what I'm going to be doing or what I need to have done. And that just adds to almost a feeling of then not being properly in control, I think, which then makes things even worse. But it's kind of, we've had the benefit of Zoom video conferencing, but it isn't necessarily, it's helping us in many ways, but it's not necessarily the substitute for having it.
Just to put another spin on it, there's one thing I love about Zoom and Teams calls. So, for example, Peter, if I was meeting you at the Law Society for a meeting, exaggerating to make my point, you'd invite me into an office and you'd say to me, would you like a tea or coffee, David? And I'd say, oh, yes, please. And you'd say milk and sugar. Someone would bring in the tea or coffee, or you'd make it, and then we'd probably start the meeting. What's happening in the virtual world? I'm getting to see inside people's houses. I'm getting to see people's pets. I'm getting to see people's partners. I'm getting to see lovely pictures on the wall. And I'm often starting Zoom meetings by saying to people, do you mind me asking whereabouts in the country you are? And what it's leading to is a lot more human conversations. And human connection is so important when we're trying to make it, people have to be able to open up and talk honestly about their real well-being. So I think in some ways, there's some greater connections taking place because we're getting to see people outside of the office. Many offices these days are open plan. Many offices these days have lots of glass in, and they're not the easiest places to have private conversations in about your well-being. Working in this remote world now, it is easier to have a private conversation, open up to someone in some ways than it would be in a normal office environment. So don't get me wrong, technology and the way of working now overall is not great, and I'd much rather be sitting in offices. But I just want real positives about that in terms of human connection. One story I'll always remember is a boss of mine said to me years ago, how's Sally's dog? And I started laughing and I said, I didn't know Sally had a dog. And my boss didn't laugh. And she said, well, you should do, because Sally's dog's her life. The next time you see Sally, I suggest you ask her how her dog is. So guess what? Next time I saw Sally, I asked her how her dog was. After that day, my relationship with Sally went to a different level. She became a real advocate of mine and a fantastic employee. And it all changed the day we connected over her dog. So although most of us are working for greater human connections, which are really important further down the line in building trust and opening up people to have proper well-being conversations. Thanks, Peter.
No, thank you for that, David. I'm sort of asking, what sort of signs should employers be looking out for? And I suppose one of the things I was thinking of with that is that I had one colleague who, during the height of the lockdown, I suddenly started receiving emails at sort of half past 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and thought, yes, that's someone who's working at home. That's someone who I know is currently looking after children, having to do homeschooling, plus has got other responsibilities as well. I'm thinking, yeah, they're really struggling to get everything in here. So it was then a matter of thinking, yeah, this person probably is going to need a little bit of help and support. But I'm just thinking, what things overall do we think that employers should be looking out for? I'm going to come to Alma first and then Helen.
So a number of things to look out for, obviously, with people homeschooling and really working in very exceptional circumstances. Part of our role also was to recognize, as leaders and lead a big team, to recognize actually there have to be different working styles now. Of course, then begs the question, well, do you actually have like core hours still when you can expect the team together? And making very sure that you explain to people, actually, we still need to have some fora where we're all together, because otherwise that is a risk that very different working styles, which really will drift us apart, and making sure that we set expectations around, actually, there are some fora when really I expect everybody to be together, so that we can actually develop the shared and common understanding, recognizing that, yes, some people have had to work very differently. That is still going on. So one of my team members, actually, her children are back at school, but actually it happened that one of the children, they had a COVID incident in their form. So the whole form now has to self-isolate, which means that she now has got a child at home again. And, you get the little chitter-chatter in the background continuously. So that is something to watch out for and keep a tab on, actually, who has to work differently. The other thing to watch out for, there is a real difference between us feeling pressure and somebody being in danger of being burnt out. So what you often get is when somebody is feeling a lot of pressure, they're getting really, really hyperactive, and often, there is a certain snappiness in conversations. What is a bigger warning sign is when people start withdrawing and not communicating, because that's a sign of burnout. When people are starting to withdraw, you get that real sense of grayness and listlessness around them. And curiously, often that gives you less of a hook than somebody who is quite under intense stress, because they tend to be quite snappy and in your face. And often you've got a real example when you can say, actually, do you know what, yesterday in that team meeting I noticed, and you've often got a real example, quite a good hook. Whereas when somebody is in danger of being burnt out, you don't get those hooks, because what tends to happen is they tend to blend much more in the background, and they become grayer and more listless. So having the courage to also open up the conversations when you haven't had that hook, but when you have really seen over time that somebody isn't contributing, to really watch out for that, because that's often a sign for burnout. And burnout is much more prolonged when somebody is really burned out. Actually, there's a danger that they're not going to be coming back for a while. So encourage people to watch out for those warning signs.
Thank you, Helen, and then David.
Yeah, I completely agree with Almith, particularly about the people withdrawing. Things, in my opinion, to look out for are, with Zoom, we only have this much, but really people are telling you still a lot by their budge. So, when people are dropping their heads, when people you can see are not so disengaged in the calls when they maybe would have been before, or noticing their energy levels through what their body is saying, you can actually get a huge amount of information from that and the way they're speaking. So turning up the volume on it, so you just start to notice it a bit more. So when you're running a meeting, look at each of the squares on the screen and be like, how's that person doing? Just you'll actually get a lot from people's faces, but it's just paying attention to it. And completely agree with Almuth about all those signs to look out for with what she described. Something else to look out for, though, is when people become very vague, going, oh, fine, how was today? Yeah, okay. And when people are really engaged, they give you a lot more detail about their experience and the different work they're doing. But when people get super vague and have that lower energy, those flat tones, those are some of the best indication signs that you can look for. Now, one thing that I'm a massive proponent on is actually picking up the phone to people, because yes, you have these group calls, but there's so much value in doing one-on-one, because I believe you can really interact with people one-on-one in a different way to group calls. So just something, don't take it for granted that because you've seen someone in a group call, that they've turned up in a certain way. If you're worried about them, really, really, it's that one-on-one interaction that's going to give you more insight.
Thank you, Helen. David, and then we've got a question from the audience, which I'm going to be asking the panel. But David.
Okay, I think it can become quite overwhelming about the amount of different signs you can look for. So trying to keep it simple for us today, you're looking for any change in behavior whatsoever. Could be a sign that someone's struggling with mental health. What I'm going to suggest on here today is that the easy bit is to spot the change. The difficult thing is, how do you start that conversation without making someone feel awkward or making yourself feel awkward? Now, as a mental health counsellor, we're trained to notice, not interpret. Because when you try and interpret someone's behaviour, because it literally is your interpretation, you can be guilty of making them feel judged, and no one likes to feel judged. But when you notice a change in behaviour, you're being factual. So Peter, if you were a good mate of mine outside of work, and you were normally very mild-mannered, but just recently you'd started biting my head, it is okay for me to say to you, Peter, I hope you don't mind me saying this, I've noticed recently you become quite short-tempered. Is everything okay? And because it's factual, you'll probably be aware you're behaving in that way. And there's a reasonable chance you'll share with me why you're behaving like that, because I haven't asked you about your mental health, and I've just noticed the change in behaviour. So I think we're looking, in summary to what you said, for any change in behaviour whatsoever. The key thing is, how do you start that conversation? And I'm suggesting to everyone watching today, you are allowed to notice changes in behaviour and ask if someone's okay. And just one more thing while I remember, as we all know, if people want to hide their mental health, they sometimes can do quite brilliantly. So sometimes you won't notice anything at all. So we've all got to tell ourselves, if anyone in your life ever does anything drastic and you don't spot the signs, don't give yourself a hard time, because people, when they want to hide things, trust me, they can. Thanks, Peter.
No, thank you. And I think that's a really, really important insight there in terms of spotting behaviour and then trying to broach the conversation. Incredibly important. Thank you for that. So we've had a question from the audience. This is a question from Howard, and he says, good mental health does not sit well with the now world and client expectations. How can we best manage this for ourselves and our teams? So I'm going to put that to Almuth first of all.
Thank you. I think partners have a big responsibility here. It's about role modeling. Now, I do a lot of work with the financial sector also. And in the olden days, what people, used to ask of fund managers was basically, how much money are you going to make for me? People are increasingly asking, how are you treating your people, right? How are actually managing people internally? And I think that's something that we need to ask of the law sector much more as well. It's not only, how quickly can you solve my case, and now I want it here and now. Actually, how are you working with each other? Because if people are healthy, if people are well, if people are happy, they're going to do a much better job in the long run. So this is really about role modeling, but also managing client expectations in a very healthy way, because good mental health is part of good work performance. People are not going to be working at their best if they're not well in themselves.
Thank you, Almuth. Helen, you wanted to come in on this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason I feel quite strongly about this, because I actually worked for a partner when I was in private practice who was fantastic. at managing client expectations. You know, he was very, very clear with the client up front about what was going to be delivered and when it was going to be delivered. And he was a great person to work for because of that. And so I completely agree with Almuth that, you know, it is really at partner level that there's a lot of responsibility there. That being said, obviously, you know, law is a service industry. So I think there's a lot about maintaining client relationships, well, sort of building them from the beginning about ways of working and how you'll work with them. And also there's actually asking your associates or whoever it is, you know, what are your capacities, and making sure that their work is managed between the team in the most effective way, but really in a dynamic way. So it's not just always given to one person, but I think it's opening this conversation constantly between everybody in the team about allocations, and really checking in with people to you know, how they're doing as a person, because at the end of the day, yes, obviously clients are very demanding, but if you end up with someone burnt out, that's a whole person from your team. And as was mentioned earlier, that's going to take a long time to get that person back, and not just back, but performing to the level that they were before. So I see it as maintenance. I almost see it as mitigation, that you have to, at this partner level, maintain expectations and timelines.
Indeed, incredibly important points. We keep coming back to this issue of communication, which I think is absolutely key. David, did you want to come in on this at all before we go on to the next question?
Yeah, just briefly, I think law firms, again, have to make well-being a strategic priority. And I'm going to bring up that word kindness again, Peter, but kindness needs training out. Every senior partner and every manager needs training on the value of kindness to both the employee, but also the business. Too many senior people still think that kindness and well-being and mental health is a fluffy subject. They haven't realized yet that if you make it a strategic priority, you will keep your best people. You'll lose less people to long-term work-related stress, and you actually drive energy and resilience. This now world's not going to go away. Technology is here forever in the pace that we work at. So therefore, the key is to give people more mental stamina to cope with it. And the way to give people mental stamina is to train people out on how to be kinder to themselves, to look after their own well-being, and how to train people as well who work for you to look after their own well-being. Ironically, I'm currently sitting in Henley Business School today, and I just delivered a session on kindness on the MBA exec program. And lots of very forward-thinking companies now, they're making this a module on every leadership development program because they're seeing it as an essential skill. So again, I think this now world's here to stay. And if we're going to give our people the tools to cope with it, we need to train them. Thank you, Peter.
No, thank you, David. Actually, I'm going to come back to you now with the next question, because I think it builds on the points you've just made. So I had a question from Sally in the audience who said, last time I worked in a large firm, I was struck by the expectation of availability outside of the traditional hours, the sort of always on thing where you're sort of always replying to emails, calls, etc. What can be done to help individuals manage this? Now, I think this is incredibly common, and indeed, I'm now managing director at my law firm, but a few people had said to me, oh, it's a big shift going from being employed as I was in a big firm to then setting up. And I said, well, not really, because, you know, even though I've been employed in a big firm, it got to the point that I was always replying to emails and calls when I was on holiday, when I was in America seeing my fiance, when I was, I remember at one point furiously trying to type an email on a BlackBerry. Yeah, back in those days. Just as the cabin door shut on a plane before it took off. And I thought, if I'm doing that and I'm actually doing this to you know, for someone else's business, I might as well do it for my own, which was a big motivator to me. But certainly, and conversely now in my firm, I'm now very, very careful, particularly with my junior staff, to say, you know, you have work hours and I'm not expecting you to be sat there turning around emails at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So consequently, having gone through that, I'm quite careful in terms of how, hopefully not incubating that same culture in my own firm. But I just wanted I'll just come to David first of all on that.
Just a very real example from the last few weeks. I heard about a senior partners meeting in a law firm where somebody had said that they'd been on emails last night between 7 and 10 in the evening because they've been on back-to-back Zoom and TA, and made the point that that's the time now of the day you do emails, between 7 and 10 in the evening. And everyone in the room laughed as if it was funny. So the following week, I happened to be running a session with that team of senior partners. And I sort of thought, I'm going to be honest with them. So I said, look, there was a meeting last week in which one of your colleagues talked about the only time to do emails these days is between 7 and 10 in the evening. And you all apparently found it funny. I'm asking you today, is that funny or is that worrying? Because, you know, your mental resilience is all about managing your energy levels. If you're doing those sort of hours, eventually you're not going to perform at your best for that business. You know, it's evidence-based that if you don't take sufficient breaks, well, let's use a day whereby you're really busy one morning and you decide you haven't got time for a lunch break. It's proven that if you take a lunch break, you'll achieve more that afternoon than if you don't. So we have to take this subject seriously. We've got to move away from the days where you get brownie points because you do the longest hours in the firm. And when senior leaders spot people sending emails at 10 o'clock at night, it's not funny. They should be saying to that person, I don't want you working in the evenings. That's your family time, strategic priority, and taking it seriously, Peter. Thanks.
No, I think that's an incredibly important point, David. And I think it's quite dangerous, I think, to almost think that, oh, because we've had this sudden push to work from home this year, that has now broken the culture of presenteeism, and, you know, the jacket on the back of the chair at all hours of the day. Because to a certain extent, it's now been replaced by that being always on at home, and people actually, what would have been commuting time is now suddenly quite intensive continuing to work time, and the work day just expanding. I'm going to come to Helen next.
Yeah, of course, and especially with technology, I always think, you know, this idea that we're always on. The nature of technology is that it moves very, very quickly. We all know that, and that actually when we start using technology, whether, you know, that's being sort of emails on all the time, let's say, what we're most concerned about is how do we get people to adopt this? We're actually not concerned about how do we also shape the behavior around it. So how do we educate people to use it in the right way as well? So what ends up happening is that often you have to do retroactive education pieces about, you know, actually turn your phone off at this time or that time. But I obviously understand that there is an industry where the clients are demanding, work is now. So the questions that I pose is, if your day is taken up by meetings, a really quality question is, do you need to be in all those meetings? Is that the best use of your time? And actually, what can shift so that you're not using your time in these meetings and you can do your emails at other times in the day? Because for me, it seems a lot more a trend that's really happened, especially over the last 6 months or so, is that you're in these meetings and they're taking up so much of your time, but sometimes they're not the best use of your time. And, you know, sometimes you'd be better off being somewhere else. So with this idea, I would say, you know, work with the other people in your firm to ask what is the best use of your time, so that you can then truncate the days. And then also there's an education piece about how to make sure that you're using technology in the most effective and most productive way.
Thanks, Helen. Alma.
Thank you. Yeah, so agree with colleagues, and we really need to shift this mindset of measuring work performance by the hours that we work, and also we need to look at work intensification a lot more, and these unset expectations that, you know, Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, people also have other tasks to do. I think good old rationality and common sense has gone out of the window a bit, where we seem to be assuming that you compile more and more tasks on people, and miraculously they're going to do it all. No, they won't. They will burn themselves out. So sometimes it's also the onus is on us leaders to think, actually, are these reasonable expectations in a normal working day week? Can somebody actually do all of these things? And I'm so with Helen. If they can't, no, let's chip away at this. So we need to look at what is actually reasonable to expect from people. What we also need to counteract are some of these implicit beliefs, because sometimes I have that when I'm working one-on-one with people, when they say, yeah, I'm always expected to be always on in the evenings and on annual holidays. And sometimes I will challenge people and say, actually, who told you so? Well, nobody really. It's just kind of this thing that I think I have to do. Well, if nobody told you, why are you doing it then? Just stop doing it. Look after yourself. Be kinder to yourself.
Thanks very much for that, Almuth. David, anything you'd like to add?
No, not on that one. I think, well, Richard Branson once famously said, you put your people first, your customers second, and your shareholders third. And how many businesses really do that? Some businesses do put their customers first, and are convinced that's the right thing, but it's not. You put your people first if you want to get the very best out of your business. And again, I'll go back to well-being has to be a real priority for a business, but they need to sit down and really think, what does that really look like? So no, thank you.
Okay. So I've got another question from the audience. This is a question from Brenda, who's asked, any suggestions on what can be done when a team member who is withdrawn simply will not engage or admit they need assistance? And I think that's an incredibly valid question, in particular, because very often, I think to a certain extent, this can be a bit of a male thing. Men really don't want to ask for help or ask for assistance. And it's also, I think, to a certain extent, a British thing. We don't like talking about things, particularly in the workplace. Helen, would you like to come in on this and start us off?
Yeah, of course. I think the most important thing to remember is that every human being is an entire world, and so I would argue that one of the best things to do is start to take as much interest as you can in their world outside of work, and things that they really care about, and try and build some sort of dialogue about things that you know are important to them. Now, if you've worked with someone for a while, you know, they are giving you signals of things they've talked about over the years or things they've done that you know that they care about. So the first place that I would start is really almost trying to get into their world a little bit. And by that, I mean, you know, connecting on things that are really sit within their internal world. And again, kind of the one-on-one phone call, actually, because I think when you don't have the video, sometimes people feel a lot more comfortable talking rather than, you know, looking at themselves and really taking it almost back to an old school form of communication can be really effective, because then again it's taking almost like a professional layer out of it slightly and connecting as human beings is really the approach that I would take.
Thanks, Helen. That's absolutely a very important point, and indeed everyone is always so different. Almuth and then David.
So one of the things that I think we can do more here is prevention. What we haven't yet talked about today is creating peer networks and getting people to look out for each other. And I think that's such a powerful thing to do. I think law is sometimes not an easy context for that, because it's a fairly competitive culture, right? It's also not a culture where you necessarily open up, but doing more of this opening up where also peers can look out for each other, that is such a powerful mechanism and such a powerful buffer. I think that's perhaps something that we could all do more of, encouraging people to look out for each other. So it's not courageous conversation, but also having peer-to-peer courageous conversations and really encouraging people to have those.
Thanks very much, Almuth. David, would you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the language you use is really crucial here. I go on and on every day about we've got to get better at talking about mental health. But if I was worried about you, Peter, the worst thing I could say to you is, Peter, I'm worried about your mental health. It's that word mental. You'd go into shutdown mode. It's too invasive. But globally, we all understand the language of 1 to 10. We all know if we say to somebody, how are you out of 10 today, energy-wise? 7's okay. Said to me, Peter, do you know what, 5? I'm able to say back to you, Peter, 5's quite low. Do you mind me asking why you're only a 5 today? And because we're using the language of numbers, You might just tell me what's going on in your life at the moment and its subsequent impact on your well-being. So I'm not oversimplifying it, but sometimes the language of how are you out of 1 to 10 is a lovely way to open up a good conversation. Thanks.
No, brilliant. That's a really good point. Thank you very much for that, David. I think that's quite right, that it's very much how the question and the approach is couched. We just had a couple of comments I just wanted to share with everyone. Comment from Nick saying, we encourage our solicitors to take time out for rest and mental health, but sometimes they insist on dealing with emails when they are on holiday, as they say it makes them feel more relaxed. And I've certainly had that that problem. I found it gets better actually by taking the email off your phone or mobile device, and it removes the temptation to check the email. Does anyone want to, David? Would you like to come in on that?
We are all unique human beings, and we do have to respect individuals. And some people do like to work in different ways. I'm the classic early bird. I am someone who, if I've got lots to do, I'll be up at 6 o'clock at my desk at 7 o'clock in the morning. But you won't catch me operating the other time of day. So any good leader, they know their people well. So a good leader of mine, if he got an email at 10 past 6 in the morning, he shouldn't be concerned. But then if you're also getting one at 11 o'clock at night, that's the time to have a chat with me. So I guess it's about knowing your people and respecting individuals and what works for them, I guess. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Alma.
So what we know from work-life balance research is, yes, that we come with different preferences. So some of us have got much more of an integrating mindset. It actually suits our ways of working to perhaps even check our emails on holidays. That in itself is not necessarily a bad thing, but of course there's a risk attached to that, right? What if that one email that you open up and you're lying on the beach, you're just having nice family time, is from somebody who is really disgruntled, a really vicious complaint? Well, what do you do then? Where do you park that? So that will then probably mean that isn't the greatest day of your holiday. So I think, yes, we all have different ways of working, but when you're doing a lot of work stuff in your downtime, that has got a risk attached to it. And I think what we just need to be aware of, that risk might be around the corner. If that happens, how are we going to deal with that? So there is no easy solution to that, but I think people who work in that way, they just need to be very, very mindful that that could happen.
Thanks, Alma. Helen.
Yes, and exactly, just from a very practical point of view, I would just add that if people are the type of people where they benefit from checking their phones or their emails when on holiday, I would just encourage them to time bar it or put boundaries around it. Because, if they're the type of people that are checking every hour, that's a very different kind of behavior to checking maybe first thing in the morning or last thing at night or both. And really just encourage them to think about the frequency and the intention behind the checking. Are they following up with a particular client that they know they need to just close a small matter on or something, or is it just because they want to keep abreast of things? So really, for me, it's about the intention behind the checking and ring fencing it.
Really, really good point. I wanted to finish off now by just sort of asking the question about working from home, and just over the last 5 minutes, if we just think about I suppose the difference between working from home and then leading from home, and the fact that they're two very different things. So I was just going to come to Alma first on that one.
So thank you for this opener, because working from home has now become so ingrained in our vocabulary, but nobody's talking enough about leading from home. And let's make no mistake, leading from home is more challenging than working from, because we are working from home, but we're also leading, and nobody is speaking enough about actually what kind of support do our leaders need. And I think to hold our hand up from time to time and say, actually, I've encountered something here where I would really value some sense checking, some exchange of best practice, so that we can actually have adult conversations about what works, what doesn't work, what can we learn from each other, but also make it much more of a conversation topic, that leading from home is more complex because you do not see people in the office. You don't pick up on these little signals when you think, actually, you know, I just walked past David in the corridor today, and there was just something about his demeanor which made me think, actually, you know, I need to ask the 1 to 10 question. You don't have those immediate signals, and we need to allow some space in our virtual leadership schedules to make sure that we have some time to reflect and to think, because that is also part of a healthy leadership portfolio, so to speak.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to come to David and then Helen just to finish. David.
I think leaders working from home, it can be more challenging, but still you can be hugely inspirational. My favorite story during this pandemic is of a CEO saying, at the moment, I don't care about new business. At the moment, I don't care about sales. My priority is you. He said, great business to work with at the end of this pandemic. And he emphasized again, at the moment, I don't care about new business and I don't care about sales. Well, guess what? They had a record new business week the following week because his people were so inspired by his messaging that they went out and worked even harder for him. So you can still be hugely inspirational from home. You may need to be a bit braver and a bit more creative than normal, but you can still be an awesome leader if you do the right things by putting your people first. When you put your people first during a crisis, you will come out the other side of it a lot stronger than if you don't.
Indeed, the importance of priorities. Thanks for that, David. And finally, just with Helen to finish.
Yeah, I'll just be in a line for a leader working from home, from being too much on people's back to being very absent. And so what I would encourage leaders to think about is the quality of their connection and the quality of their communication with their people, very much to David's point. So you're not chasing people, but you're not also someone that they feel completely disconnected to. And within your communication, I think it's really important to be giving people the context of decision making and of your leadership choices, because then people can see the rationale more rather than just being told to do X, Y, and Z. And they feel much more skin in the game and much more brought in from it. And with that context as well, as a leader, it's really important to have consistency in your messaging. Not one day this, one day that, but certainty and consistency in the way you're approaching it and the direction that you're going can be very helpful.
Fantastic. Can I say thank you, Helen? Thank you, David. Thank you, Almuth, for, I think, a fantastic panel and a great way to finish our conference for the last 2 days, being able to bring together such important issues for our audience to consider and reflect on. And I think, given where we are now, I think it's great we've had this conference in September, because we can think about these things going forward, because I think there's going to be these ongoing challenges for at least the next 6 months and maybe longer. So I think it's great, and thank you all three for sharing all of that insight and being able to bring those points out for our audience. So thank you all very much indeed for doing that, and thank you for giving up your time and sharing all of that with the audience. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
After 2 days of interactions with our panels, their thoughts, their observations, I have enjoyed the opportunity to learn all the different insights that our panel have been so kind in sharing. I just now want to say a few thanks. First of all, I want to say thank you to who all gave up a significant amount of time, both speaking at our conference, but also preparing for it. You can imagine we've had to get together to think about what these panels are going to look like. And I think I also want to say thank you to our in the events side of things, because they've had to organise these panels. We took the decision to have hour-long panels, which I think hopefully we'll agree has meant we've been able to have real in-depth discussions with our speakers and really get to the heart of the issues we've wanted to look at. To our sponsors, because if we didn't have the sponsors, we wouldn't have been able to turn around and make this a free event for you, our audience, and to bring in over 550 registered delegates to this event from across England, Wales, from across the UK, from across Europe and around. All so much for joining us, and I hope that you have indeed enjoyed it. If you have found this useful, please take a look at the Law Society's website. We have some great resources on there and a lot of information that follows up and builds on a lot of the things that we've been talking about today with our panel. There are things on there like other potentially free events and other events that you can register for, podcasts, and lots of other sources of information. It is a new Law Society website, new for this, new content and a new look and feel. So please do go on there, and please, it helps us with our development to be able to get more interaction with you guys in terms of the things that are on there and the content that's available. And that really is it. So thank you to you, our audience, for your fantastic questions as well. Without that, I don't think we would have had quite. I think that has been great to have as well. I think we've shown in the last couple of those who aren't familiar with law and technology think, oh, that's a very narrow, specific specialism. It isn't. It includes law, tech, cybersecurity, data protection, compliance, remote working, delivering different services for your clients, and totally innovating in the way that we think about the way the law is delivered in future. So I hope that you can now, having experienced this, you'll be able to take the good news about innovation, spread it to your employers, your organizations, all around the world. So I hope that that is helpful. And if you enjoy conversations around law and technology, I regularly produce a podcast each week on technology law issues. App of choice, just type in digital law and you'll see a weekly podcast in there as well that you might enjoy. But thank you for listening. I enjoyed the conference, and hopefully we'll look forward to seeing you at other Law Society events themed on law and technology in the future. Thank you all very much indeed. See you again soon. Goodbye.